Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Found Shouko Todoroki? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanf. It was a peculiar thing, Shouko thought, being a girl. At home, it was rarely mentioned after her quirk manifested. As a child, the women of the household matched the men in numbers. Mother and Fumi would dote on her in her earliest days before she'd gained her power. Fumi was 7 when she was born, 9 when Shouko was old enough to play fashion models with her. The two of them would strut down a fake runway in far too big high heels and dresses, Shouko having no clue what was going on but eagerly mimicking her sister's motions as she spun and twirled, their mother laughing and clapping for them. Those memories were her favorite, much preferred to the times she would walk past the training quarters and hear Tuya and her father in a screaming match before the heat of flames picked up and a maid would materialize out of seemingly nowhere to scoop her up and move her away. No, the memories of being young, dressing up with Fumi, having her hair pulled into high pigtails by her mother, running outside and squealing in joy when Natsuo would pick her up and spin her around, Shouko preferred those. Then one day in late December, Tuya left. He was there and then he was not. There were no answers for her. 6 days later, Shouko's quirk manifested at dinner, fire and ice bursting from her head after she sneezed. Her father's face lit up and her mother's dropped in anguish. From that point on, gender was a non-factor. There was no difference between male and female on a battlefield of unbelievable superpowers, nor was there in her father's training room, at that time at least. He insisted her hair be cut short, long locks cropped to her ears. Shouko's childish complaint that she looked like a boy was met by a harsh slap across the cheek by her father, her young body skidding across the floor from the impact. She didn't complain about it again. Her days consisted of training until she was ill, tears falling down her face as fire and ice shot from her body erratically. She was 3 when her quirk came in, for when she started training, and 5 when her last point of female contact was removed from her life in a flash of pain and tears, of screeching tea kettles and melting flesh. Fumi was hardly allowed to talk to her anymore, not since that fateful late December dinner, and now her mother was gone. Shouko had nothing but her power and her father, 2 things she was rapidly learning to despise. Her heart started to grow cold, ever colder. Her elementary school was all girls, very much an elite affair for wealthy daughters. Shouko didn't stand out much, ignoring the other students entirely. Why should she care about joining in on soccer games, choir clubs, lunchtime chats? She lived in a different world from all of them. These girls who talked too loud, laughed and cheered for each other, had access to frivolities like dolls and game consoles. Shouko couldn't relate. Comments about her physical appearance and gender never started until middle school when her schooling became co-ed and boys became a part of the scene. Shouko didn't care about boys in the same way she didn't care about girls. They weren't a part of her world of pain and burns and a father she loathed so much that she had stopped using his power entirely. Her first year of middle school was the one that made her remember that she was female. The stares in elementary school had been ones of confusion and irritation, often born of Shouko brushing everyone off without even a verbal response. The ones she got now, they were leers. Suddenly, she was the one staring in confusion as male classmates eyed her body over, often stopping at her chest or legs where her sailor uniform skirt rode up a bit past her knees. It was both surprising and enlightening. She was different from her father in this way, different from the overpowering and intimidating giants he saw as the ideal heroes. The leers may have disgusted her, yes, but Shouko had a weapon stronger than her ice now. "I need a bra," she said one day before training, about a month after middle school started. Internally, she whooped in laughter at the way her father's face tightened up in discomfort. "Didn't see that one coming, did you, you piece of trash? All the other girls wear them now. I need one too." "Then we'll tell a maid to get you one." Endeavor looked like he didn't know what else to say, something Shouko relished in. She didn't need a bra that badly, though she was on the tall side, A mix of intense training and a highly monitored diet meant she'd remained almost entirely muscle, her sturdy yet lean body looking more androgynous than anything else. A few nights after that particularly harsh session, a maid sent to measure her confirmed that all she really needed was a training bra. Fine by her. That by itself was what set off a light bulb in her head. Her femininity was something she could use to get back at her father, the bastard who'd robbed her of her childhood. Slowly, she started growing out her hair. The boy's cut she'd worn since 4 years old gave way to chin-length locks, and Shouko relished in the subtle twinge of irritation her father wore after her hair finally brushed her shoulders, long enough for her to tie back with a pink elastic, not a color she particularly cared for, really, but wasn't it supposed to be for girls or something? Her ultimate goal was to grow it to the length she'd remembered her mother's being, rib length or so. The more she could resemble the parent whose quirk she planned to use for her entire life, the better. The more she could remind him which parent was allowing her to succeed. It was all out of spite, frankly. Shouko's heart remained coated in frost, barring any sort of real happiness. Her world was still so harsh and violent that she knew a moment of genuine softness would mean her downfall. She'd seen what had happened to her mother. All she knew about Tuya was that he'd had a meltdown and run off. And most of all, she pretended she was asleep on the nights a shaking Fumi would crawl into her bedroom, nestle up next to her to whisper sobbing apologies and ask the heir why it had to be like this. The Todoroki bloodline was full of wires ready to snap at any moment, and Shouko knew she was being pulled taut. This would not happen to her, not if she had anything to say about it. She didn't particularly want to be a hero defined by her gender. People like Midnight always made her roll her eyes, but if it could be something that would separate her further from her glorified sperm donor, then she'd happily adjust her appearance. God knows her behavior wouldn't change, that was beyond Shouko's realm of ability. The thought of wearing big smiles and making squealing noises at cute things and acting cheerful was just undoable. But if she could emulate the subdued aesthetics of an elegant woman, oh, her mother was elegant, I miss you, miss you, then she would achieve her goal. Wani-san, please teach me makeup. Fumi jolted up from her homework in the dining room, eyes widening at the sight of her sister. The older girl was a second year in university now, studying hard at something or another. Shouko didn't really talk to her that much. Didn't get the chance, aside from those nights when she'd crawl into her room, and that was just Fumi talking to herself next to Shouko. The bicolored girl stared blankly ahead as Fumi struggled for words. That's oh right, you want to learn cover-up for yourself? Interactions over the years had often involved Fumi covering bruises and burns for her little sister, something she'd learned to do for everyone else in the house. Shouko briefly pondered over the fact that Fumi had essentially become the mother to the children at barely 10 years old before shaking her head. Oh, I want to learn makeup. Real makeup like you have. The other girls wear it now. That was a slight stretch, but now in her second year of middle school, the other female students certainly seemed to at least be interested in it. Fumi looked like she didn't know what to say before offering a hesitant smile, tapping her phone screen once and checking something. Okay, yeah, Dad won't be home for a few hours. I can show you some. Getting up, Fumi brushed off her jeans before leading Shouko to her bedroom. It wasn't as big as her own, but it was more furnished, a few posters from what Shouko vaguely recognized as a popular singer decorating the walls. She also didn't have a vanity like her older sister did, small and covered with products. So I don't really have that much in regards to fancy makeup, but Dad's business associates usually bring gifts for everyone when they meet here, so... But you probably know that already, huh? I bet you haven't touched yours much? Shouko furrowed her brow in confusion. Wait, what do you mean about yours? They bring gifts. Now it was Fumi's turn to look confused. They do. You know, like when he had that meeting with Gang Orca and his PR team last month. Shouko did remember that, actually. Their estate had a meeting hall built into it, so meets with other pros weren't uncommon. As per usual, she and her other two siblings had been ushered in to greet Gang Orca and exchange pleasantries with a few people before being told to scuttle back to whatever they were doing beforehand, just routine etiquette, honestly. The hero had seemed nice enough, though Shouko didn't really care that much about the whole ordeal. I remember, yeah, like how Dad passed those courtesy gifts along to us. I got a really pretty set of teacups, Natsuo got this neat little phone speaker, and I think they got you. Oh, you got that nice pink lip gloss. Fumi snaps her fingers as she recalls it. Remember? The thing in the silver packaging? I literally didn't get anything. I've never gotten a present from any heroes before. Shuko blinked, confusion turning into hard understanding. Father must intercept anything meant for me. That's the... maybe so. Never mind. Fumi's face fell, awkwardness resounding throughout the room until she let out a nervous chuckle and clapped her hands together. Alrighty. Let's show you how to use makeup, then. Shuko's anger over this revelation turned into an opportunity for spite. So he was denying her the chance to choose the type of person she wanted to be? Not fucking shocking. That had been her entire life. But the shitty old bastard wasn't here right now, and she was going to wear makeup no matter what. Allowing Fumi to guide her over to the vanity, the older girl pulled Shuko's hair back into a loose, low ponytail before pinning back her bangs. So I'm gonna do your makeup so you get an idea of how it goes on. So first things first, we'll get your hair out of the way. It's gotten really long. It's past your shoulder blades now. Fumi was trying too hard to make the atmosphere light again, but her efforts were commendable enough to get a response out of Shuko. I've been growing it. It looks so pretty. The pitch in Fumi's voice indicated her relief at getting a reply. Shuko knew too well that she didn't always indicate that she'd heard people past a nod or flick of the eyes. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a primer. That basically gets your skin ready for makeup and ensures it stays on. Fumi talked Shuko through all the steps, the younger girl content simply to listen to her sister as she spoke about different products and how each one went on. The only small pause was during the application of foundation, Fumi's voice trickling to a pause as the makeup started to reach the edge of her scar. Shuko knew it wouldn't be enough to cover it. If the chemical products developed by Japan's best skincare specialists could hardly fade it despite how hard her father had pushed for it in her youth, it wasn't going anywhere. Just go around it. Eye makeup can go on it normally, but it'll be too hard to cover it up. Alright. Stumbling a bit, Fumi fell back into rhythm shortly afterwards, moving on to contouring and explaining how to seal the makeup. Shuko watched in content silence as her face changed gradually, internally realizing how she couldn't recall the last time she'd blushed as the pink powder of the same name was applied to her cheeks. She wasn't too interested in the makeup itself, but for a little, it was nice. Doing something an ordinary girl her age would do. Did her classmates have big sisters of their own to show them how eyeliner is applied? Did they also shirk and caution away from the eyelash curler until it was explained? This was a world of normalcy, one she'd been denied her entire life, one Fumi had been denied. The older girl looked like she was actually having fun, making little jokes about the names of the products. Shuko had no idea what deep throat meant or why her sister giggled at her saying it, but it did sound like a bad name for a blush, and chatting idly about her day. Turns out her major was childhood education. Shuko was learning more about her older sister in the span of an hour than she had in the past 7 years. At one point, Fumi had excused herself for a minute, coming back in with a small black speaker in her hands. This is that speaker Natsuo got from Gang Orca and his firm. He let me borrow it. Turning it on and fiddling with her cell phone for a minute, the room soon filled with music. It wasn't anything special, some pop song, but Shuko found herself tapping her foot nonetheless. Maybe it was just because she was enjoying this entire atmosphere, comfortable, light-hearted, with hands on her skin that touched her softly with no intention to harm. It was nice. Really nice. Despite herself, her lips curled up slightly, small smile on her face as Fumi returned to her makeup. It's almost done, Chocolat. There was a pause as Fumi realized what she'd done, the girl making a meep noise and pulling away even as Shuko missed the feeling of the hand on her cheek. I'm sorry. If that slipped out, No, Wani-san. It's okay. Shuko's heart had jumped at the nickname. God, how long had it been since she'd heard it? At least 6 years, probably more. It came from Natsuo originally as a very small child. Shuko's love for Zurisoba was only tempered by her love for chocolate, milk chocolate specifically. Given how much easier it was to be given a piece of chocolate than it was to be cooked a full meal, she ate it a lot more too. Having noticed her adoration, Natsuo teasingly knighted her chocolate, because looky Fuyumi, looky mama, doesn't it sound like chocolate when you say it fast? Let's call her chocolate. And it had stuck up until her cursed quirk developed, until she was pulled away from that love and warmth and forced onto a strict diet with no room for sweets. God, she hadn't eaten chocolate since she was 5. Please. You can call me that. Fuyumi looked hesitant. If you're sure. Chocolate. Hiding the warmth that spread through her body at the name, Shouko settled back into the routine of makeup and chatter, occasionally interspersed with a word from herself. It wasn't like she had much to say, not much of a life to talk about, but she did recount a story about a boy from her class pranking the teacher with a blackboard eraser over the door only for the teacher's laser eyes Quirk to instantly disintegrate it. Though she hadn't found it particularly interesting at the time, Fuyumi's overjoyed belly laughs brought that small smile back to her own lips. Maybe it wasn't the makeup she was after. Maybe it wasn't the urge to spite her father that drove this afternoon. As Fuyumi offered to style her hair, Shouko's agreement stemmed from something entirely different. Maybe she just wanted to experience an ordinary moment of happiness. As she actually chuckled due to the way the hairspray made Fuyumi sneeze, Shouko could forget her burden as an object created to overcome the current number 1. She was a normal kid having fun with her sister. All good things, though, must come to an end. And in the Todoroki household, it was always an end of flames and tears. Just as Fuyumi was digging through her vanity drawer to find the perfect accessory for her newly styled hair, which now barely brushed her shoulders due to how the loose ringlets shortened it, but Shouko didn't particularly care about that. The music was just loud enough to drown out the stomping footsteps. Loud enough to ensure neither of them heard Fuyumi's phone buzz with Natsuo's warning text. Loud enough that they didn't suspect a thing until the door slammed open, shattering their happy moment. Fuyumi yelped and Shouko jumped at the sudden noise and heat. Endeavor stood in the doorway, blazing gaze looking down upon both his daughters. Eyes flickered around the scene seemingly stopped in time, Fuyumi frozen in shock, bent over her vanity drawers, diamond hair clip in one hand. Shouko, deathly still with her hands in her kneeling lap, face done in full makeup with her hair curled. The music played on, too cheerful for a situation of this level. Shouko. Endeavor spoke evenly, never a good sign. Get changed. We're training in 20 minutes. Your dash. Shouko's voice caught in her throat for a moment. You're home early. Her father's eyes turned harsh. Work ended early. And I don't see how that negates my previous order. And as for you, Endeavor's gaze turned to Fuyumi, who was visibly trembling under his stare. I need to talk to you. Father, it was my idea. The reality of the situation crashes down on Shouko all at once, and she's scrambling to get to her feet and get between Endeavor and her older sister. You can't. I asked her to do this, don't dash. And she chose to agree to your childish whims. A hand wraps around her wrist, and Shouko bites back a scream as she feels the heat burn right through her sailor uniform's long sleeve and onto her skin. This is not your world, Shouko. This is not the life you were created for. Now wash the crap off your face and meet me in the training hall before you make this worse for all of us. Shouko, honey, please just go. Fuyumi pleads, and Shouko can feel her own heart break at the tone in her voice. It'll be okay, please just go. She can't even bring herself to look back as the shame as to what she's put Fuyumi through hits her. Yanking her hand away from Endeavor, she steps around him and out into the hall. As soon as she's out of sight, she books it for the furthest bathroom from this wing of the house. Shouko learns that it's harder wiping makeup off when you're crying from something other than immense physical injury for the first time in maybe 4 years. She learns many things that evening. She learns Endeavor is not above threatening to burn that goddamn hair off if she doesn't understand her position as his creation. She learns his attacks become infinitely harder to block when there's anger fueling him. She learns the healing quirk user employed privately with the vast funds belonging to the Todoroki family can keep an unaffected face while puttering away at the fabric that melted into her skin from the sheer force of her father's fire. And the next morning, Shouko learns crushing guilt as Fuyumi, poorly concealed black eye and all, hugs her and apologizes for not being more careful. Chocolate, I'm so sorry, I didn't protect you. Shuko's hatred for her father grows like a pillar of ice. She'll never let that bastard win. Months pass and it was more of the same. More isolation, more acts of rebellion that lead her to violence, and more charred skin Shouko hid under her uniform. Idly, she wondered if the fact that most of her father's violent attacks were aimed at her upper body was a coincidence, or if it had something to do with the way Yue's skirt wouldn't cover much of her legs. It had been the understanding her entire life that she would attend the most prestigious hero school in Japan just as her father had. Honestly, when Shouko thought about it, she wasn't sure if it had even been said aloud at any point. It had been the unspoken truth. She'd been made to ramp up her studying in her 3rd year of middle school, growing more and more isolated. There was a joke in her school that the mysterious and silent daughter of Endeavor might secretly be a ghost considering how little they saw of her outside of class itself. Honestly, Shouko didn't think they were too far off with that one. In regards to her own feelings, well, Shouko knew damn well at this point that trying to delve into the emotions she'd buried so deeply in ice would only cause her to implode. At best, she'd be a mess in a hospital ward like her mother. At worst, she'd suffer whatever fate Tuya had out in the world. So if you were to ask, no, Shouko did not have feelings one way or another about the things that had been done to her. Her only moods were haughtiness and rage expressed through spiteful acts she knew would bring her self-punishment. She tried not to think of her afternoon with Fumi the year prior. Happiness was reserved for those in the other world. Her trying to cross over would only bring innocent people pain, and what kind of hero would knowingly force others to suffer? You know the answer to that, though. The days rolled by, and it was suddenly the UA entrance exam. She'd been recommended, yes, but that didn't mean the prestigious school didn't still require her to prove her worth through a specialized exam. Male and female applicants were separated. To Shouko's understanding, the school accepted 2 boys and 2 girls through recommendations. Once upon a time, she had dreamed of failing this exam just to spite her father, to show him she wasn't the perfect tool he'd tried to shape her into. Aside from how he'd almost certainly beat her within an inch of her life, heroism seemed like perhaps the only path on which she could reasonably go. What else existed in the world for a girl forged together with unbelievable power sizzling under her skin, someone hardened by fire and ice and hate? This was her only option. Lining up at the starting line and listening to Present Mic'd, one of the few famous pros she hadn't met in person, explain the rules. And did Shouko ever realize how she was going to crush this thing? She simply mentally repeated that truth drilled into her over the years. This is my only option. The buzzer went, and she was gone in a flurry of perfectly practiced ice, pure power soaring from her feet as she scaled the course like it was a children's playground. There was no hesitation in her movements, after all. This was precisely the event she'd been training relentlessly for over the past month. Each step was as natural as breathing. She finished a full 30 seconds in front of the other girl, a tall, dark-haired beauty who seemed to be missing her top. She forgot that, but didn't forget the motorcycle she was riding? Whatever. She offered Shouko an exhausted smile, and the bicolored girl simply looked away in disinterest. She had achieved her goal, and she'd done it using only her mother's ice. She sincerely hoped they showed the tape to her father, present mixed congratulations being drowned out in her spiteful thoughts. She flipped her hair over her shoulder. It reached the top of her ribcage when she pulled it in front of her ears. Exactly the same as her mother had hers the last time Shouko saw her. Yes, today had been a victory. Even if the person she was claiming her win for thought her a monster as hideous as her father. It was well about what she'd expected. Shouko takes her assigned seat without questioning. There's a boy with bright red hair and a pink girl with inky black eyes chatting excitedly with each other near the front, and their conversations halt as they both lean back with an enthusiastic wave and a greeting. She nods, which is essentially the Shouko equivalent to a big grin and a hello, before proceeding to watch the others fill in with considerable disinterest. A plain-looking boy with a tail, a charmingly frog-like girl, a stoic boy with a bird head who nods at her before taking the seat directly in front of her. So these are her classmates. She couldn't remember a single name out of her middle school classmates. This seemed like it would be more of the same. Some stood out more than others as they piled in. The other girl from the recommendation exams gives her a smile of recognition before taking a seat next to her. This time, it looks like she didn't forget her shirt. Shuko gives a nod in return. Meanwhile, the far too loud and boisterous boy with glasses and wildly waving hands has an air about him that she can't quite place. She certainly doesn't think she's met him before, but he's familiar in a way. The next boy to come in short with purple balls dotted along his head in lieu of hair makes a whistling noise as he looks from Shuko to Ponytail Girl. Ponytail's face scrunches up in revulsion as Shuko merely blinks. She doesn't get it, but in any case, it seems like the last of the class was starting to file in. The glasses boy seemed to be speaking with a peppy brunette and green-haired girl near the front of the room, the latter seeming wildly embarrassed over something. She's not sure why her eyes hold onto that scene for longer than the rest or why something stirs in her chest, but her focus is quickly pulled to the strange caterpillar man shambling into the classroom. His attitude is one Shuko can work with, and she's one of the first out on the field in her gym uniform. Quirk assessment is chugging along easily, giving her a look at everyone's quirks. The other recommended girl, and she actually remembers this one's name, Yayarozu, doesn't her father's PR firm do business with a corporation of that name, indirectly confirms why she was missing her shirt during the exam. Her quirk seems to allow her to create things from her body mass, which is actually pretty impressive. Negating gravity, talking to animals, explosions, leg engines, and that's where she knows him. Ingenium has been to her estate once or twice for business affairs. He's not old enough to have a son, so this is likely a brother or other relative. Shuko wouldn't be the only legacy hero here, which is comforting in an odd way. She wouldn't be the only one living up to expectations. Speaking of expectations, the ones she's set for the green-haired girl have to be the lowest, only slightly above the strange great boy who keeps leering at Yayarozu like boys in middle school would at her. She hasn't demonstrated any quirk at all yet, and the way she's practically radiating anxiety doesn't say many positive things about her. There's a brief incident between her and their teacher, Aizawa. She should at least remember that one, before his capture weapon releases and allows her to take the ball throw after a miserable first attempt. Shuko genuinely has no clue what her quirk is or if it's useful in any of these tests. Looks like she'll be the fur. Shuko's hair is pushed back in a gust of wind as the girl launches the ball like a rocket. Many, many years later, Shouko Todoroki will recall this as the moment she'd felt a twinge in her chest that she'd never experienced before, not knowing what to make of it at the time. For now, though, all that runs through her mind is, what the fuck? There's shouts and cheers from Engine and Gravity, the rest of the class murmuring excitedly at what kind of quirk could possibly do something like that. Aizawa has to stop Explosion from charging the girl, who looks like she's cradling a broken finger. Erasure seems like an incredibly useful quirk when dealing with superpowered students, and it's oddly satisfying to see Bakugu, the name Aizawa calls him as he lectures the furious boy through his capture weapon, shout and uselessly attempt to set off explosions. Despite his strong quirk, it's clear the boy is driven entirely by his emotions. Just another person from the other world, the world where people don't beat the feelings out of you. Sighing, Aizawa drags Bakuga back to the group before ordering the girl, Deku? It's what the loud boy had been calling her, back to the crowd. Though she walks meekly, head down and body crouched to make herself seem smaller, which was just odd considering Shuko doubted the girl even reached 5 feet standing straight up. Deku's shaky smile brings to mind a certain hero she was engineered to defeat. There's that twinge in her chest again. How odd. Shuko keeps looking her over to try and figure out why that might be. Now that she's within a few yards of her, Shuko can definitively say this Deku, strange name, but it could be worse, girl must be around 4'11" at the most. That said, she's clearly highly athletic underneath the gym uniform. Shuko notes she looks like she built herself for strength rather than endurance like Shuko herself was crafted. Her biceps are visible as she cradles her broken hand, and the bicolored girl feels an emotion that she's certain must be jealousy as she has no other classification for the pressure in her stomach that rose up so suddenly. All that said, the girl has a remarkable baby face, teary green eyes and chubby cheeks flanked with freckles. Her hair is a huge mop of wild green, tied up in a high ponytail that snuck all the way down to the small of her back. It was a peculiar contrast, honestly, but strength and sweetness somehow felt right on her. At some point, Deku seemed to have noticed her staring and gave the other girl a confused look, but Shuko's eyes remained fixated on her until she awkwardly stepped behind Engine Boy. What was so special about this ordinary girl? Shouko honestly didn't know, and the feeling soon passed as the tests move along. Deku comes dead last in the apprehension test, which is just confusing to Shouko. Surely a girl with that much muscle could have bested well over half the class in the grip test and overtaken most in the running portions? Not to mention how far her pitch had gone. The fact that the invisible girl or the purple boy staring at said invisible girls but in the gym pants somehow did better than her is just peculiar. Luckily, and Shouko doesn't know why she finds it fortunate that this complete stranger wasn't expelled, doesn't know why she cares. It turns out the expulsion threat was entirely false. The girl is sent to the nurse's office crying tears of relief, and Shouko pushes Deku from her mind as she meanders back to class. Whatever peculiar feeling is in her chest can be ignored in favor of the reason she's here. The day goes by in a flurry of teachers greeting them and syllabuses Shouko tucks neatly away in her backpack. Though much of the class sticks around after the final bell rings to chat, she has no time for that, leaving as soon as she can. There will be training tonight, she's sure of it, and she wants time to get her homework done first. She's learned over time that it's much harder to focus on school while you're trying not to strain exhausted muscles or lean against a fresh bruise. As soon as she opens the front door to her house, Fumi pops her head out of the kitchen at the end of the hallway. "Ah, Shouko, can you come here for a second? It's been a while since they were able to have a long conversation." The guilt over 2 years ago still aches from time to time, Shouko's heart cautioning her about putting her sister in the line of fire, literally, because of her own selfishness no matter how much she craves a gentle touch or a chilly hand brushing through her hair gently. The words of her father on that day ring through her head like funeral bells. This is not the life you were created for. Even so, if Fumi is beckoning her, Shouko walks forwards, hanging her backpack on the hook in the hallway before turning into the kitchen. The scene that greets her is a surprise in the way that finding an elephant wearing a top hat in your bathroom is a surprise, completely unbelievable and entirely unprecedented. Fumi is beaming at her, pink apron tied over her work clothes. Natsuo is seated at the kitchen table behind her, and he's smiling and offering a wave too. 3 beautifully presented bowls of zarusoba are set out on the table, and one is right in front of Shouko's chair as if it's waiting for her. "You trying to catch flies or something?" Natsuo, the Natsuo she hasn't seen or spoken to in almost 9 months, teases, and Shouko belatedly realizes her mouth has been hanging open in shock. The girl quickly closes her mouth, but the bewilderment over the whole situation is still leaving her wide-eyed. It takes her a moment to even allow her eyes to flick to Fumi in search of answers. "Surprise!" The older girl chuckles. "Dad got a call today, they needed him for a situation way up in Miyagi. He's gonna be gone until tomorrow, so I figured we could have dinner together to celebrate your first day at UA." Shouko wants to pinch herself. How is all of this happening? Her siblings, all but one, are here. It's her favorite food. The night is free of the bastard. They're all smiling at her, smiling like she is an accursed child who lead to their neglect and loss of their mother and... "Shouko?" Fumi's voice breaks through the spiral, and Shouko realizes her hands are trembling. It's real. All of this normal family life is real and it's happening to her. It looks really good. It's only her years of practice that allow Shouko to speak without her voice wavering and cracking. "Really good. Wani-sen, Oni-sen. Thank you." "Ah, good." Fumi wipes her forehead, giggling. "I thought you were upset or something. How about we get to eating?" Natsuo waves his hand in the air with a grin. "Is UA still as crazy as I remember? Is Recovery Girl still there?" Both her siblings had gone to UA too, Shouko remembers this, but they were both in general studies thanks to a number of factors. Their father had forbidden them from trying for the hero course. There was going to be just one heir to the Todoroki legacy, and it was going to be his perfect creation dash. Neither of them had much desire to be a hero in the first place, and despite Fumi's ice quirk being on par with their mother's in sheer strength, in Natsuo's case, well, there'd never been a quirkless hero before. Sometimes, Shuko wondered if perhaps it was better to be the isolated child turned into an object for her father's prideful goals instead of the shameful burden kicked out on his 18th birthday and forced to change his surname to his mother's so that he would no longer taint the family line. It wasn't the time to dwell on that, though. For now, Natsuo Hikawa now, she thinks idly, was back in the house, and they'd get to be a real family if only for a little bit. Taking a seat next to him and across from Fumi, Shuko hides how she wants to freeze time and stay like this forever when Natsuo ruffles her hair affectionately. She'd spent less time with him than even Fumi, the boy wisely choosing to hide himself away from their father's rage by either locking himself in his room or avoiding being home at all. Honestly, that and the fact that he was funding his own way through university might be the most she knows of Natsuo past their childhood playing. Even so, he's always been affectionate and kind, giving hugs and big smiles, and Shuko marvels at the fact that her siblings emerged from this cursed household so kind, so full of life, so loving. Why, then, is her own heart so twisted? Over the taps of chopsticks, a scene from nearly 2 years ago replayed. Natsuo became less of an acquaintance she sometimes saw around the house and more of a proper big brother over the slurping of noodles. She learnt that he was attending the same university Fumi did and that he was majoring in biology, minoring in psychology. He wanted to become a doctor eventually. He has a girlfriend who was all the way from Nagasaki, and her quirk let her change her hair color to whatever she liked. Recently, he's been learning sign language because it seemed interesting. Shuko could only listen, taking it all in. In turn, she offered what meager information she had on herself. It wasn't like she had much of a life to speak of, really. She hung a bird feeder outside her window lately to watch the robins. Her new teacher is a pro she's never heard of. One of Ingenium's relatives is in her class. The table filled with life, Fumi joining in. Shuko still wasn't fully convinced this wasn't a dream she was having. A normal family dinner. Normal sibling talk. Normal. Briefly, she excuses herself to the restroom with Natsuo's teasing call of, "Call us if you get lost," prompting a secret smile as she exits their line of sight. Now, washing her hands and staring into the mirror, Shuko is alone with her thoughts. Did they ever feel jealous? Asks one. Jealous of me? Because although her childhood was hell, the burning hell that sometimes led her to bite at her own wrists to try and express her own helpless rage in the only way she was ever taught, she was at least acknowledged. Natsuo got it worst of all. Obviously, the mere concept that one of his own children could be quirkless seemed to drive Endeavor to fury. But Fumi had been ignored unless she was somehow important to Shuko's development. Her quirk was powerful, but their father had very little interest in ice alone. She was the mother after her own left, forced to learn to cook and clean and tend to wounds. Of course there were maids and other employees, but their numbers dwindled as Shuko got older. Shuko figures it was probably to keep loose lips from spilling the truth about this hell house. Had they ever looked at Shuko, showered in attention and given first priority in any situation, sent to the best private schools and given the best tutors, raised to have the career just about everyone dreamed of? It was possible. Shuko knew she was often jealous of them in any case. She'd been a bit jealous of Tuya when she was extremely small, considering all the attention he got from their father. Now she knows what a foolish thing that was to envy. This was a curse, and he just got out in time. She's not so lucky. Did her siblings miss him? Do they know where he went? Shuko was far too young and hardly saw him. She was less attached. But he would have been Natsuo's older brother, someone to look up to and pester out of love, like the daydreams you have about what you and Fumi could have had if you weren't cursed. Fumi. Well, he was her twin. Shuko can't imagine how badly Tuya vanishing must have hurt her. Does she think about him sometimes? She realized that she'd been staring blankly into the mirror with the water running for a bit too long. Turning off the water and drying her hands, Shuko swiftly returned to the dining room. Negative thoughts could be pushed aside for now. This was a rare good day, and she wasn't about to let thoughts about her doomed legacy ruin it. Taking her seat, she managed to smile gently back at Fumi. Welcome back, Chocolat. You guys still use that nickname? Natsuo beamed. When it's just the two of us, sometimes. Shuko nodded. Though it wasn't really something punishment-worthy, she had no idea how Endeavor might react to the cutesy nickname. What if he took it as a sign Fumi was interfering too much with his prized creation? Best to just not use it and avoid unnecessary conflict. Natsuo laughed between slurps of his soba. I'm sure whoever came up with it was devilishly handsome and brilliant. Chocolat? They've exchanged more words within the span of an hour than they have in 8 years, Shouko realizes numbly, and a part of her heart that managed to escape her eyes twinges with sadness at the realization that they won't get to be a normal family like this for a very long time. It could have been different, couldn't it? Things like this could have been their version of normal had they not all pulled the short stick when it came to their birth family. Imagine if they didn't all have to memorize each floorboard that creaked in the house and instead lived a life where getting scolded didn't mean the two grown-up big sister treating burns and covering bruises. That was a reality that could have been theirs once. Well, she could focus on what if some other time. Fuyumi's genuinely happy smile, Natsuo's presence, Shuko's free night without training, these were rare moments, as were most of Shuko's voyages into the normal world she was denied. She was going to hold onto these precious memories as tightly as she could. Because you know who you could become if you ever forget the light, don't you? The peace brought on by their dinner was temporary, even as Shuko's heart ached for it to last longer. The next day, Natsuo was gone. He had to be. Endeavor returning while he was there would have been a disaster, and the house was Shuko's alone, Fuyumi having left early for work with an apology note on the kitchen table and the encouragement that she have some toast for breakfast. Shouko leaves without food. She doesn't feel particularly hungry right now. The next day is normal school mostly. Things she's done her entire life. Math and science never interested her, and English has a funny way of escaping her grasp constantly, but she can handle all of it fine enough. What is new is when All Might enters the room with a bang loud enough that Shouko subconsciously tenses, her mechanical pencil creaking as it's coated in frost from how hard her hand is clenching it. All Might is no threat, she reminds herself, but it takes a minute for her ears to stop ringing. She doesn't like the sound of doors slamming. There are plenty of noises Shouko hates, really. Nails on chalkboards. People chewing out loud. Garage doors opening. They're given their hero costumes, Shouko smiling slightly in the dressing room when she realizes it's been built just as she requested. Though she was honestly more comfortable in something subtle and loose, that was also what her father's design team had recommended when talks about a potential costume arose last year. Though he'd been displeased with her choice, he couldn't stop Shouko from submitting her request for a skin-tight bodysuit in pure white, inspired slightly by a conversation they'd had where her father grumbled over the stupidity of MT Lady's pale-colored bodysuit, the left side of her body encased in an ice-like armor. The heater is on her back, looped around both shoulders and under her chest, and she can feel the idle warmth as she slips it on, ensuring one half is tucked under her ice armor suitably. It only heats, never cools. She won't ever need it to cool. Your costume is very nice, Todoroki. A voice from beside her speaks, and Yaoyorozu is smiling at her. Her own costume is fitting for her quirk. A bodysuit sits slightly lower around her hips than an average bathing suit, a yellow belt of unopened pockets sitting around her waist. The costume goes up to her neck, a long closed zipper running from there to below where her belly button presumably is. A white cape graces her shoulders, and Shouko briefly wonders if she had a professional team aiding her in the design. The Yaoyorozu family certainly had the money for it. Thank you. So is yours. Shouko can compliment a good design when she sees it. The rest of the girls are mulling about excitedly, complimenting each other's costumes as they finish getting them on. Shouko's eyes drift to Deku's green, skin-tight suit as the girl pulls her wild green ponytail through a hole in the back of her head covering. The whole thing looks a little tacky and hastily made, frankly. Skin-tight seems to be the norm among female heroes, herself included, so she's not surprised that a quick glance leaves Earphone Girl and the floating pair of gloves as the only outliers. Shouko doesn't have much time to focus on that, though, as everyone else is piling out of the change room and she's not about to be left behind. Just about everyone else is outside, Shouko instantly noticing Engine Boy, Ida. Apparently that's how Fuyumi and Natsuo had referred to his older brother after she brought him up last night, and his ingenium-like costume. So he'd be carrying on that particular legacy, Ichim? Just another thing to differentiate her family from most other heroic households. There's a twinge of disappointment, of maybe someone would have understood before Shouko quickly squashes it, turning to All Might. Battle trials? Sounded decent enough. Shouko finds herself paired up with a Mizo Shuji, who nods as they search the crowd for each other. It isn't difficult to find him, his appearance isn't one you easily forget. They won't be going for a while, and the other two they'll be paired up against, Mashireo Ojiro and Toru Hagakure, don't seem like any sort of significant threat. As the first groups are sent off to their posts, Deku is shaking in her sneakers, it seems, and the stare Bakugo gives her is downright feral. Shouko has a bad feeling about this. We should formulate a plan of action. A voice interrupts her thoughts, and she turns to find Shuji towering over her. Shouko's a bit tall for her age and ethnicity, 5'6" last time she measured, and she still finds this guy huge. Those were mutant quirks for you, she supposed. Perhaps. Shouko takes a moment to cast an icy glare at the great boy whose eyes are locked firmly on her rear. The boy blanches and skitters back good. She knows she can give a mean scowl when she wants to, but she settles her expression into her normal one of neutral distaste as she turns back to Shuji. Can you explain your quirk? My quirk is called Dupliarms. Shuji starts, raising his 6 interconnected limbs up. I can recreate my own body parts on the ends, and they have enhanced abilities when compared to the original. To demonstrate, he creates a mouth on the end of one of his limbs, which then begins talking for him. I can manifest many different parts at once, as well. It's creepy to watch, but it's nonetheless going to be useful for what Shouko is already planning. I see. Her eyes flick briefly to the screens around the room as the teams start off, Deku and Gravity Girl climbing in through a side window. Can you determine where people are by their footsteps? If you make an ear, that is. Generally yes. Shuji nods. Good. Do that when the match starts, and I'll handle the rest. At her response, Shuji cocks an eyebrow. Are you sure? What's your quirk? Shouko figured she couldn't really afford to lie about her quirk, but she could stretch the truth in regards to what it was capable of. My quirk is half hot, half cold. I can generate large amounts of ice. I'll freeze the building and keep them in place while I get the bomb. She could almost feel Shuji's apprehension at both the name and the described ability, but he seems content to leave it be for now, turning to the screens as Shouko does. It looks like Bakugo has found Deku, and Shouko finds herself cringing at the cruelty of the situation. There's no reason for him to brutalize her like that, and she feels an unpleasant memory crawl up her spine and tingle at the back of her neck. Electric Boy Kaminari makes a comment about Bakugo not holding back at all against a girl, and she'd roll her eyes at the dated commentary if she could pull her eyes away from the screen. An enormous explosion covers the camera in smoke, Bakugo ignoring All Might's warning, and Shouko releases a breath she didn't realize she was holding in when Deku stumbles to her feet, parts of her costume torn and skin reddened in familiar burn patterns. For an awful second, it genuinely didn't look like she was coming back from that. Shouko finds herself echoing the same opinion as multiple of her classmates. Why isn't she using her power? Deku is being beat into the ground, picked up and thrown like a rag doll, and it's almost infuriating. Did she just forget what she did to the baseball the other day? The pink girl in the eye-straining costume makes a noise between a gasp and a whimper as Deku braces for an impact, and the entire upper floor shatters with the combined force of an explosion and a punch, rubble flying wildly and disrupting multiple camera angles. Ida and Gravity are blown back, though the girl takes the opportunity to quickly grab a pillar and launch a flurry of debris at the boy. Shouko's barely paying attention when Gravity jumps onto the bomb, like the rest of the class. Her eyes are fixated on Deku's broken body, arm bent back so far and burned so deeply that she feels her stomach twist. She collapses in a pile of rubble, legs equally twisted, and Bakugo can only stare, slack-jawed, at the girl who broke herself just to set up a convoluted plan. Even so, she wins. She won like that. Even so, that kind of attack. Shouko thinks she knows why she was so interested in this girl now. She's not sure her current theory is correct, but if it is, things are going to get complicated. The rest of the matches and their results are no shock to her, though Shouko is quietly pleased to note that nobody else had to be carried out on a stretcher. Her own match with Shuji is over in a heartbeat, Shuko barely acknowledging the frozen Hagakure and Ojiro as she went to claim the bomb. It also turns out that the girl is not named Deku, but Izumi Midoriya. That makes more sense. Shuko learns this through the concerned whispers of Urarakan Gravity Girl, apparently, and Ida, which she finds herself ignoring Team G and Team C's battle, and she's not exactly torn up about that, given how the grape fool's constant leering whenever Yaoyorozu opens her zipper to expose her stomach leaves Shuko with a bad taste in her mouth, in order to eavesdrop. Midoriya's quirk is called Superpower, and it apparently has a bad habit of injuring her whenever she uses it. That seems like an inconvenient limitation. Shuko knows the pain that comes with quirk overuse. Frostbite is not an experience she is eager to go through again, but decimation on that level is really bad. She wonders how long Midoriya will last in the hero course like that, and then takes a moment to puzzle over why the thought leaves a bad taste in her mouth. As the exercise wraps up and Shuko finds herself in the change room, she ponders over the results. Who was her biggest competition here? It had been drilled into her mind that every other student was a rival, someone she'd have to overcome eventually to become number one. Honestly, the biggest threats from what she'd seen as of yet were Yaoyorozu, Bakugo and Tokoyami in descending order. Yaoyorozu had easily the most versatile quirk in the classroom, and she'd even come ahead of Shuko in the assessment test the day before. She was the one to watch out for the most. Bakugo's power level was completely insane, but his entitled attitude was clearly holding him back. If Shuko was lucky, he'd eventually get himself expelled and she could tick him off the list. Tokoyami was more of a dark horse, dark bird, but she'd seen his careful steps and planned out maneuvers during his combat trial. Not watching him would be a mistake. She was caught up in her thoughts as she changed, ignorant to the world around her. Stupid mistake. Shuko didn't even realize someone was trying to get her attention until her bare back was prodded right where her spine still ached from a vicious kick during last week's training with her father. Reflexively, Shuko spun around, grabbing the offender's wrist and wrenching it upwards. It was a simple move, one that had been beat into her when she failed to perform it correctly, so it was instinct to perform. Until she heard the pained yowl and remembered that this was the change room, not the training room, she was fully prepared to follow through with the traditional knee to the sternum. Shuko blinked once, and the attacker vanished, replaced by a squirming girl with horns and pink skin. Ashido? Ashido! Shuko promptly releases her, and the girl makes a sound between a wheeze and a laugh as she rubs her wrists. Geez, Todoroki. You sure don't mess around. Sorry. Shuko takes a little too long to respond, something she hopes escapes the attention of the rest of the change room, who are staring in bewilderment at the scene. It's okay. Straightening up as she stretches her arms out, Ashido beams at her, black eyes lighting up as she leans in. She got over that fast. Anyways, I was trying to ask you something, but you were totally spaced out. Shuko knows she has a tendency to do that, and doesn't see it as apology-worthy when she's already said she's sorry once, albeit for something else. What was it? Who do you think the cutest guy is? Ashido leans in further, prompting Shuko to take a step back. Our classic Japanese beauty must have an opinion. Blinking, Shuko wonders if she somehow misheard all of that. The sound of something getting swatted in front of her brings her back from the inside of her head, which is currently playing the We Channel theme and swirling with question marks, and to the present, where Ashido is pouting after earphone girl smacked her with an earlobe. At least let the girl get dressed, Ashido. Abu. Ashido pouts, big and overdramatic. You're no fun, Jiru. Jiru, if that turns out to be her name, rolls her eyes. I'm reasonable. We don't even know the guys yet. But we know their faces. If we were just judging attractiveness based off faces, Bakugo might win. But he's way too cruel to ever really be cute, ribbit. Oh. Tsu doesn't hold anything back. Shuko has lost interest in the conversation. In fact, she didn't have any interest to start with. Everyone was going to be in for a rude awakening if they thought something as trivial as romance could happen in the cutthroat world of heroism. Why even bother? She's seen how relationships blend with heroics. They go together like gasoline and a lighter, water and a grease fire, screaming teapots and the face of a terrified little girl howling "Mama stop, Mama please, Mama why?" Shuko wants to stop thinking about this. It's not their fault they don't know. They'll learn one way or another, and it's not her responsibility to teach them. She ignores Yaoyorozu's concerned glance at how tight her expression has gone as she changes and leaves the dressing room first. Midoriya doesn't return to classes that day. Shuko leaves at the last bell without waiting for anyone else. Why would she? There's training at home, and she can't afford to be late. The next few days are more of the same, sans one of their classmates almost killing another, and Shuko has no problem keeping up with both the physical and academic portions, even with burns and bruises distracting her. She wished her fool of a father could acknowledge that perhaps he could tone down his training now that she was at UA. She's running laps and improving her quirk each day at school, so there's no need for more at home. At the very least, Shuko wishes he'd learn to tone down that damn flame to prevent little burns. She's changing around other people now, and bandages and cover-up can only hide the truth for so long. She almost doesn't air that opinion until the cruel voice that seems to follow her around just to jab at any exposed weak points whispers, "You're a true Todoroki woman, weak and cowed into silence." And the next thing she knows, she's snapping at her father about it, and Fumi is left to help her cover up another black eye. Whatever. The only remotely exciting thing to happen is Thursday. They elect a class president, and Shuko votes for Yaoyorozu with little hesitation. She herself has zero desire for the role, and so far, the other girl is the only one who hasn't demonstrated either complete incompetence or extreme irresponsibility. She gets vice president, and Midoriya winds up class president, not shocking, considering that these things were always based on popularity. The small girl already has a close-knit circle of friends, and there's no doubt most of the class feels sympathetic for her after the training incident with Bakugo. What is surprising is the way Midoriya gives up the position to Ida after a very confusing lunch hour. It's a strange opportunity to squander, but if she wants to decrease her chances of making it big, that's not Shuko's problem. Friday comes, and there's apparently going to be a special exercise today, rescue training at the USJ. Shuko's never gotten that down past the basics. Her father isn't a rescue hero primarily, his quirk is too oriented towards combat, fire only brings pain. So she's looking forwards to learning how her ice might be useful when it comes time to save others. So naturally, everything goes to hell in about 5 seconds. In a confusing cloud of panic, Shuko learns several things. 1. Aizawa is apparently an underground pro called Eraserhead. 2. These villains intend to kill them. And 3. Bakugo and Kirishima are complete morons. She ruminates in irritation on the last bit as she's pulled into a warp gate and landing flat on her back in the landslide zone of the UA. The villains are nothing, honestly. Shuko barely even feels a hint of adrenaline as carefully practiced ice floods over the ruined ground, stabilizing it and trapping each of the hired thugs up to their chins. Shifting gracefully to the side as she senses movement behind her, Shuko grabs a spear mid-attack, ice shifting down the weapon and holding the struggling villain in place. He looks genuinely terrified, but Shuko feels no sympathy as she leans in to glare at him. You're encased fully in ice. I'd give it 10 minutes until frostbite starts to kick in. From there, your cells will die slowly. It starts in your hands and feet before it creeps up your entire body, killing all sensation beyond repair. Unless you're interested in becoming a quadruple amputee, you'll be answering my questions. If she wasn't so focused on the battle, Shuko might have been disturbed by the way she spoke, too much like her father and his cruel manner of handling villains. But she's too busy to draw attention to the troubling parallel, and her glare only darkens as the villain whimpers in fear. Well, time's ticking. Shuko almost wanted to laugh as she learned of the villain's plans, knocking them out before allowing a slight amount of warmth to sneak past her palm, kickstarting the process of thawing them out. Kill All Might? Seriously? What a bunch of prideful idiots. It was All Might. And given that the hero in question had just burst in seconds ago, sans his signature smile, it looked like things were going to be resolved quickly. Even so, when that monster appeared, well, Shuko couldn't explain what triggered her to freeze herself a bridge of ice, rushing to the plaza. Call it heroic instinct, but something felt wrong here, and as she watched the battle between the monster and All Might, she knew her assumptions were correct. He was pinned down between the warp gate villain, and if she didn't act now dash. Shuko swings her arm out, firing out her ice in a controlled sheet that encases half the monster like a blanket. It makes a horrifying screech at the impact, and it gives All Might just enough time to free himself from its grasp. Sighing in relief, Shouko stands guard by the Warp Gate villain, who has been pinned down by Deku. Regarding the misty void with furious eyes, her gaze is quickly drawn to All Might, and her eyes widen. She's never seen him hit something so many times with so much force. Shouko feels her mouth hang open in amazement as the symbol of peace himself takes down a foe that she'd seen destroy her teacher only minutes earlier, sending it flying with a victorious smash as the creature goes straight through the USJ's ceiling. A childish flurry of glee overcomes her even as her face stays blank. She'd seen All Might help in person. She'd even helped. Somewhere in a cold heart, a little girl with bicolored hair in high pigtails squeals in happiness. Even so, it's not done yet. There's so much smoke, something isn't right with All Might, and the hand villain charges, and Midoriya screams, full power filling her body as she flies forwards, arms extended in a punch. Even from this angle, Shouko can see the girl's legs flopping unnaturally, no doubt horribly broken. That villain with the disintegration powers, if she runs into him. The pang of fear in Shouko's heart, however, is interrupted by gunshots, and the hand villain goes down as Midoriya skids out on the ground. Ida's voice booms across the USJ, and as present mix scream is heard, Shouko realizes the teachers have arrived. All Might is fine, Midoriya is fine, she's fine. The following events are all a blur. Shouko and her classmates, sans one, a certain green-haired girl having been loaded into an ambulance, gathering outside, surrounded by police and paramedics. Shouko's fine, not a scratch on her, and spends the bus ride back to school in pointed silence. Fumi texted her earlier, saying she saw the news and was on the way to pick her up from school. Her sister brings back the realization that, oh, right, she has a house and a family, if it could be called that, to return to after her entire class found themselves the victims of attempted murder. She has mundane things to worry about, even as everyone else seems to find their worlds turned upside down. Will her father hold back on the training tonight knowing how today went? Later that evening, Shouko learns he will not. There is another incident the day school starts back up, and even though it's not nearly on the level of a large-scale villain attack against a group of first-year students, it manages to shake Shouko to an uncomfortable point. It was the middle of heroics history, Midnight going over something about an addition to hero law in the 80s. Shouko honestly wasn't paying attention. She knows most of this already, having grown up with a pro who grumbled endlessly over paperwork and incident reports, and something else had her attention. Namely, her stomach hurts. She'd been trying to grit her teeth and bear it for the most part. She knows she's good at handling pain, but this was just unpleasant. It was like something is gnawing at her from the inside out, heating her up to a point where even her attempts to regulate her heat with her ice weren't helping. Was it something she ate? Breakfast was rice, miso, and smoked salmon, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for her at all. It could just be a random ailment, and Shouko sighed internally as she imagined her father forcing her to train through it because heroes don't have sick days. Shouko. Whatever. In fact, she didn't take any sort of action until she felt an uncomfortably cold feeling on her legs. Looking down, Shouko's eyes widened as she realized that not only was there a red stain on the front of her skirt, but she was sitting in a small pool of blood that made a disgusting squelching noise as she shifted in surprise. What the hell? Was she injured somehow? They hadn't had heroic fundamentals yet. It couldn't have been from that. Shouko's brain racked itself for answers. Could training last night have resulted in internal bleeding of some? She found that unlikely, as last night was comparatively easy. She'd only had a bruise on her arm to cover up, nothing that could cause a slow flow of blood the day afterwards. Running through a few other scenarios, Shouko came to the conclusion that she had no clue what was going on, but it couldn't be good. She raised her hand, Midnight looking at her quizzically. "HM? Is something the matter, Todoroki?" Shouko must have looked mildly distressed. She could feel her brow furrow, lips pursed tightly. "May I go to recovery, girl? I believe I've been injured." "Injured?" Midnight asked, looking concerned. Eyes are on her now, the peculiarity of her statement drawing looks. She could hear Yaoyoro's gasp from her left. "Where are you hurt, honey?" "I don't know. My stomach was bothering me. And when I looked down there was blood on my, what are you doing? Shuko cut herself off as Yaoyorozu stumbled to her feet, eyes wide with frantic concern as she yanked her own jacket off to throw it over Shuko's lap. Todoroki, it's stained? She yelled, looking worried. Shuko's face remained the same, but internally, her tension was rising. Was it bad? I am aware. Shuko heard Satu stumble over words to her right, and as she turned her head, he was very pointedly turned away from her. To her front, Tokoyami, who had turned around to see what the fuss was about, quickly swivels back around. Dark Shadow makes an embarrassed-sounding chirp. Yaoyorozu looked confused, and there was a gasp of recognition from Midoriya as she, too, clambered to her feet, rushing over. Ah, Todoroki. Don't worry, I have a stain remover in my bag, we can just dash. Why does everyone seem to know what's going on except me? Shuko cuts Midoriya off, irritation sneaking into her tone. She doesn't like being left out of things when they're pertinent to her. Miss Midnight, there's blood between my legs and on my chair. I can't determine the cause. There was a multitude of awkward squeaks and sympathetic oof sounds throughout the room. Midnight looked thrown off guard, to say the least. Todoroki, it's okay. I'm going to come with you to Recovery Girl, alright? That made sense at least. Shuko still didn't understand why half the males of the class were either blushing or staring at literally anything else. She heard Mineta make a faux gagging sound to her side. Ooh, gross. Are you 10 fucking years old? Grape shit? An unexpected ally comes in the form of Bakugu, who turns around and stares Mineta down with a glare that could melt icebergs. If you're gonna be a dumbass over a period and still expect the girls to even glance at your shitty little face, you're even stupider than I thought. Mineta makes a meeping noise, staying quiet. Shuko breaks the brief silence. Period? What do you mean? Once again, silence falls. Yaoyorozu and Midoriya both look bewildered at her, and the other girls who had started to stand look equally as surprised. Midnight looks confused for a moment before shaking it off, heading towards Shuko. It's all right, honey. Let's go to Recovery Girl. Please, allow me to come as well. Yaoyorozu barks out, blushing as she realizes how loud she was. She's my classmate too, and I just dash. Me too. Midoriya abruptly raises a hand. Miss Midnight, let me come. I gotta atone for scaring her in the change room the other day. She needs some aid through this, ribbit. I mean, it isn't like we'll be learning without a teacher, so. I'm coming. I don't you know what? Screw it. I'm coming along. I have extra Midol. I'm coming too. Before Shuko knows it, the entire female population of Class 1A has gotten to their feet, insistent on following Shuko to the nurse. Midnight calls out for a somewhat flustered-looking Ida to keep the peace as she comes along. She still has no clue what the hell is going on as she's ushered down the hallway. The first person to question her is the invisible girl, Hagakure, she thinks, who turns to her with a predictably unreadable expression as they travel in a pack down the first stairwell. Todoroki, is this your first time getting your period? 15th super late? Hagakure. Yaoyorozu scolds as she finishes tying her own jacket around Shuko's waist, something she'd been working on doing since they left the classroom. That's impolite. It's fine, Yaoyorozu. Shuko hates herself for the sudden, unsure tone that creeps into her voice. She hates sounding vulnerable. I still don't know what you all mean by period. The looks on everyone's faces are nothing short of gobsmacked. Though she rarely feels embarrassed, Shuko feels something adjacent to that at their stares. Midnight hums sadly, placing a hand on her shoulder. The touch is gentle, almost maternal, and Shuko resists the urge to lean closer. Menstruation, darling. Do you know what that is? No, whatever she's missing is clearly important if the concerned expressions being sent her way are anything to go by. Midnight rubs her shoulder gently, and Shuko allows herself to inch slightly closer to the teacher, close enough to faintly feel body heat. That's all right, Recovery Girl can go over it with you. This is normal. Normal? She's bleeding. Shuko masks her confusion with a nod, and instead focuses on Jairu and her slightly awkward cough. What about your mom? She didn't bring it up to you? My mother is out of the picture. It's not exactly private knowledge that Endeavor's spouse mysteriously stopped being present for all public events, so Shouko doesn't feel nervous revealing that. What does make her nervous is talk about mothers while she's so close to midnights her useless brain is chirping at her like a bird, making associations between the gentle hand on her shoulder and a touch she's missed for the better half of a decade, and it's taking all of Shouko's energy to shut it up. Oh. Jiru's cheeks were pink already, but her blush deepens further at the response. Sorry. It's fine. Shouko says because it isn't. By this point, they're standing outside of Recovery Girl's office. Midnight leaves to go talk to the other woman and explain the situation, and that leaves Shouko and the rest of the girls waiting just outside. A voice catches her attention, and Shouko's gaze turns to Midoriya. The girl is wearing a nervous smile as she speaks, and a fluttering feeling shoots through Shouko's chest. She bets it's because of how ill she's feeling already. Don't feel embarrassed, okay? This happens sometimes. Yeah, don't worry. Uraraka's cheerful tone feels a bit forced with how much enthusiasm her voice is carrying, but the bass is still quite genuine. When I got my first period, I was in class too. I didn't even realize until I got up to answer a question on the board. Oh, that's rough. Ashido winces sympathetically. I got mine wearing white shorts. It was super bad. I'm sure we all have stories about ours. I don't. Tsuyu speaks placidly as always, and Shouko can't help but find her neutral expression and croaking voice a bit comforting right now, even if she doesn't know what exactly they're talking about. Is this blood normal? I'm transgender, but I try to carry painkillers or pads just in case someone else does, ribbit. Shouko actually knows what that means this time. It's a well-known fact that the current number 3 hero, Hawks, has been open about being a trans man since his debut. He's funded multiple charities for transgender youth, something she finds reassuring in the way that it at least proved to her that not every high-ranked hero was hiding a beastly interior. Shouko has met him and likes him well enough, even if her father seems irritated by him. Jiru makes a surprised noise beside her. Wait, you're also? I thought I was the only trans girl in the class. Her voice is a mixture of surprise and relief. So it's 2 of us now, ribbit? How nice. Like Hawks. Ashido smiles brightly. Well, not exactly, but you know. Uraraka beams. It's so nice of you to come anyways. Girls supporting girls. Stories of identities and badly timed events are interrupted as the door opens. Midnight walking out with Recovery Girl. The old woman smiles understandingly at Shouko before nodding to the other girls. Well, let's get this all sorted out, shall we? You girls can go back to class. Wait, we can't leave her. She's probably really confused. Ashido says something accurate for a change, though Shouko's not sure why them sticking around would help any. Recovery Girl sighs, waving a hand. Then I can explain everything to her. Don't you have a class to be in? How about you ladies return when I'm all done here? Provided Miss Midnight gives you her permission, of course. The older woman casts a gaze up to the pro, who nods with a smile. With some final grumbling and offers, Hey Todoroki, do you need my doll? Recovery Girl probably stalks that, Shouko is ushered into the nurse's office, the older woman inviting her to sit on the bed. Seeing the way the girl hesitates, Recovery Girl chuckles, patting the bed. It's lined in paper, sweetheart. Don't you worry about a stain. A stain of any type on a couch at home would have been disastrous, and even with this reassurance, it takes Shouko a moment to sit down, shifting Yayarose's jacket to cover her front and to avoid sitting on it. There's a few moments of near silence, Recovery Girl humming slightly as she digs through a drawer before emerging with a notepad and a warm smile. Now, dearie, can you tell me what you know about menstruation? About 30 minutes later, Shouko leaves the nurse's office embarrassed and enraged. Not at Recovery Girl, of course, the old woman was as sweet as could be, there was no reason to be upset with her. No, she's angry at, well, her situation in general, but mostly at her father. Recovery Girl had gone over a lot with her, teaching her what a period was, why it happened, how to deal. It was entirely new for Shouko, a girl whose closest female contact was often too nervous to meddle with their father's precious creation in any way. At one point, the conversation had veered into other aspects of her health apparently, Hagakure's earlier comment about 15 being late for your cycle to start was very much true. Q taking her height, weight, inquiring about her exercise and eating habits. Recovery Girl had made a humming noise as she delivered her results. Well, Todoroki, I'm going to tentatively state that you haven't been eating enough for most of your youth, and that added to your exercise routine has delayed your period well past the average age. If this keeps up, you're at risk to developing what we call the female athlete triad, and that's going to affect your health negatively for the rest of your life. While it's good for a hero to be firmly in shape, not taking breaks and exercising moderation can be very bad for you. The doctor had tapped the girl's thigh, taut with thin muscle. Shouko had known her eating patterns weren't the best. Her father strictly regulated what she ate, and denying her food was not at all uncommon when she underperformed. Over time, she'd gotten good at hiding stolen snacks around the house, some crackers tucked in rolled-up socks, a pocket stitched into her futon that often hid granola bars, and so on. But feeling full was something she often found herself being denied. Recovery Girl had continued on, scribbling something on a piece of paper before handing it to the student. Here's my recommended treatment, dearie. The supplements aren't expensive and can be added to your food. Make sure you tell your father you shouldn't exercise at home for longer than 40 minutes a day, not until you've put on at least 20 pounds in fat. You'll be training at school anyways. It's important we allow your body to catch up. Your fertility could be damaged if you keep going. Please don't hesitate to ask me if you have any questions about women's health. I know it must be hard with just your father. Oh man, didn't Shouko ever know that? Apparently most girls were taught about this in the third grade. Shouko's school didn't have a sex ed program. Both her elementary and middle schools had been private and high-price affairs, places where parents didn't want to encourage delinquent behavior by teaching the students about basic human bodily functions. Her own body had always been a tool for the man who created her. She knew this, but it was still the body of a human. Why was she never told about this? Her thoughts swirled in her rage, trying to find her answers. Did her father just forget? Did it slip his mind that his perfect creation was also the bearer of 2 X chromosomes, would eventually reach maturity and have her first period in the middle of class? Shouko's mind shot back to her life not long after her quirk had manifested, the hair being cut. Only being permitted a skirt when it was a school uniform. The makeup, the burns and Fumi's black eye all in the name of some powders and creams. Had he wanted a son all along? She didn't know, but the mere prospect was enough for deep rage to simmer in her stomach. It was not the first time Shouko wanted to explode at her father, consequences be damned, and it would not be the last time. Recovery Girl had offered to call the other girls back as they'd initially wanted to do, but Shouko had declined. She was feeling a shame she'd never known she was supposed to before today, the embarrassment of having basically shouted into an air horn that her period had started to her entire class now itching under her skin. Shouko didn't even want to go back, but it wasn't like she had a choice, like everything else in your own life, little puppet. When she marched into the classroom, a new skirt and an aching stomach soothed with painkillers, there was an uncomfortable silence. Shouko nodded absent-mindedly as Midnight asked her if she was feeling better, walking over and dropping the freshly washed blazer in her arms on Yaoyorozu's desk before sitting down. Her chair was clean, she noted as she pitied whoever wiped the blood off, returning to her notes and doing her best to sink into the cold as she always did, blocking off feelings and hiding away from the poorly disguised stares in a cloak of ice. Shouko was waiting in the front room when her father got home, sitting next to the kotatsu and dressed in comfortable sweatpants and a tank top she'd gotten as a hand-me-down from Fumi. Speaking of the eldest Todoroki daughter, she had texted Shouko to say she'd be working later than usual, so the younger girl was fully prepared to confront Endeavor alone about this. Her rage had not cooled despite her best efforts. Ideas of how she'd go about this swirling and rendering any hope of taking coherent notes for the rest of the day moot. Now, though, she had a pretty good idea. Even if the sound of the garage door made her hands instinctively tighten, Shouko held steady as the man walked through the door. I was in Recovery Girl's office today. Endeavor paused as he slipped off his shoes, probably having changed at the office before coming home. God knows all the attention he'd draw in full regalia. And why are you telling me? I'm not allowed to exercise out of school for longer than 40 minutes a day until I gain at least 20 pounds. Shouko fixed him with a stare. In fat, not in muscle. Her father raises an eyebrow, irritation clear on his face. And just why the hell would you need to do that? Shouko grits her teeth, meeting his bright blue eyes. I learned what a period is today, and how strange it is to start yours at 15. I learned it because I got my first one in the middle of class and humiliated myself in front of everyone by not knowing why the hell there was blood on my skirt, taking advantage of her father's flabbergasted expression, the one he always wore when their sad excuses for conversations inched towards femininity. Shouko continued, raising her voice and channeling the anger and embarrassment from earlier. Recovery girl said I have to put on 20 pounds, or I might be sabotaging my own process. Shouldn't you have known this when you decided on my regimen? Don't you dare take that tone of voice with me, Shouko. Endeavor snaps back, recovering from the shock of recalling his child was female quicker than Shouko might have liked. You really think you're going to rise to the top spot if you take breaks where the male heroes around you don't? You're already fighting at a disadvantage as is. Even if this is dangerous, even if she knows how it's going to end, Shouko bares her teeth and allows more rage to seep into her voice. Expressing anger has never done anything but gotten her beaten, but she is so tired of holding everything in and learning to bandage her burns, scars, the raw bite marks digging into her forearms as she expresses her fury in the only way she was ever shown. Getting to her feet, she stands 5 feet away from her father, her nostrils flaring. What disadvantage? Is it because you think women are weaker? You've already driven any hope of being a normal girl out of me, and you think continuing to destroy my health will do anything but lead me to retiring in my 20s. She hates him, and the rising heat in the front room may not be from Endeavor alone. A part of Shouko is screaming to stop. She intended to make him uncomfortable not to do this, but she can't stop her rage from billowing out. She is a Todoroki, a legacy built on tears and fury and destroying anything in your way. She should have known it would end in violence. She is bound to feelings of lividness. A cursed child who was too stupid to see past her own disposition. Endeavor moves much quicker than Shouko ever could, and there's a slap across her face, strong enough to send her skidding backwards in a sick recreation of a certain argument over hairstyles when she was 5. Fuki's pissed. She's sent flying on top of the kotatsu, the electric heater making a creaking noise as it breaks under her weight, with splintering while her body crashes through it onto the floor. A sharp pain runs up her back, and she shrieks. Endeavor grabs Shouko by the collar, eyes blazing in every sense of the word. You should have been a son. The man roars, shaking her. Shouko tastes blood. She thinks she bit her tongue. Your quirk should have been Tia's, Natsuo's. Instead it went to an ungrateful brat who can't understand what I've sacrificed to try and level the playing field for her. You think you can afford a day off? You think you're deserving of special treatment, that villains care that you're a woman? Then you've thought wrong. Fuck you. Shouko screams like a trapped animal, ice she summons being melted instantly by the sheer force of her father's hellfire. The rage overshadows her fear, the girl baring her bloodied teeth. You think I can control how my body functions? I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be a woman. I didn't ask to have this quirk. I don't twist and turn in the ways you want. I'm tired of being your fucking legacy because you weren't good enough. I'm your daughter, and I'm the best you're ever going to have. There is a silence, a moment of calm before the storm, as 2 hateful sets of eyes meet. Shouko is braced for impact, almost craving the validation of a broken nose or handprints around her neck. She's hit a nerve, and she wants nothing more than for her father to prove that she's lost the battle but won the war. Instead, Endeavor does something strange. He drops her. Shouko tumbles back onto the wreck of what was once the kotatsu, staring up at him in confusion as he stands silently. Why isn't he hitting her? What are you? Her father looks pensive as he looks down at her, but there's no sorrow or anger. He looks like he's just understood something. So you want to be treated like a woman, do you? If you're going to turn your back on the hand I offered that would have pulled you out of that fate, then so be it. Even though he doesn't sound angry, there's a threat in his voice. Shouko doesn't know what she did, But she knows she fucked up, unable to do anything but stare up at Endeavor in confusion as he leaves the room with a parting word. Go see the healer. No training tonight. Don't say I didn't warn you, Shouko Todoroki. Shouko has no clue what the hell just happened. He'd never reacted like that before, and she's not sure that it's any better than being left with an eye swollen shut. She didn't mean to get that aggressive, nor for it to go this far. She's an idiot for thinking she was anything but blood and rage. For a moment, all she can think is, poor Kotatsu, as she lies in the ruins of the heated table. Shouko's anger runs wild, it runs deep, and she should have known better than to pick a fight when she's too full of bitterness and brutality to bring it back down. Now her father is planning something, and not knowing what that man is going to do never leaves Shouko feeling anything but paranoid. Cringing as she got to her aching feet, Shouko spat blood from her tongue onto the wreckage of the kotatsu before slowly limping to their healer's private quarters. She wouldn't go there unless her father instructed, the tight-faced woman being paid per use of her quirk, meaning they'd quickly run up wild bills if she went there for every bruise and scrape that she could have otherwise taken care of herself. But since it was his order, something made Shouko very anxious about disobeying him right now. The rest of the night had been, well, technically it had been peaceful. Fumi had panicked when she'd gotten home and fretted over Shouko, but the younger girl dutifully did not reveal the reason the kotatsu had met an untimely end. After that, she'd done her homework and gone to bed early, the extra hours not consumed by her exercise routine too eerily empty to do anything but sleep. There wasn't anything in the morning either, with the lack of an enforced morning run. Shouko hesitantly did stretches in her room before breakfast in an attempt to fill her hours. It wasn't like she had hobbies, wasn't allowed them. What was she supposed to do now? School was school, with the exception of a couple of the girls asking her if she was feeling okay after yesterday's incident. Shouko told them she was fine, and offered nothing else when prodded for information. The only notable incident of the day was an encounter with a horde outside their classroom, other courses trying to scope out the competition after one as unfortunate incident at the USJ. It was of no concern to her, they weren't going to be any sort of issue for Shouko, especially not the strangely deadpan boy with purple hair and eye bags of the same color. But Kogu, as he was prone to do, made everything worse. Whatever. Eating her lunch alone, the pocket money Natsuo had slipped into her hand as he left that cozy evening going towards buying an extra treat to try and put on weight, a nashi pear tart, which proved to be a shockingly tasty yet calorie-laden dish. Shouko distracted herself from the uneasy feeling by scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone, letting her thoughts melt into nothing as she read the news concerning an impressive rescue mission in Kagoshima headed by the Wild Pussycats. There was no such thing as peace in Shouko's life, and that fact left her on edge all day. She was waiting for some sort of disaster to strike and throw her entire world on its head, a paranoia that, at least for today, turned out to be justified. When she came home, Fumi was in the kitchen, leaning back to greet Shouko as the girl passed. "Oh Shouko, how was your day?" "Fine." Her response is simple, because she genuinely doesn't know how else she can explain the bizarre tenseness of this Tuesday. Fumi nods, used to Shouko's one-word responses by now. "That's good. Ah, Dad wanted me to tell you that he left something for you in your room? He dropped by about an hour ago before heading back to work." Something in Shouko's gut twists. That definitely feels like it's going to be the instigator that shatters her fragile peace. Thanking Fumi before hurrying up the stairs, feet finding the quiet floorboards more out of instinct than actual fear, her father isn't home anyways. Sliding open her shoji door, Shouko's heartbeat picks up in fear as she sees a letter sitting on her futon. Approaching and unfolding what turns out to be a printed-out email, the bicolored girl's eyes widen like dinner plates as she reads the letter. She reads it again, praying that maybe this time, the words will rearrange themselves into another option. Just try it again. There is a change that time, but only one word, which becomes a blurred mess as one of her tears drips onto the paper. Holding the paper that may as well be the proclamation of her death sentence, Shouko reads it one last and desperate time. "Mr. N.G. Todoroki, thank you for submitting your daughter's profile for review and matchmaking. Your generous donation has ensured we have the funds to prioritize Miss Shuko's omii ceremony over other company clients. Your request sheet was dutifully attended to, and we are pleased to report that we have found a match suitable for your daughter's needs. Our suggested match is Mr. Hideyomi Ando, another hopeful who responded enthusiastically when shown Miss Shuko's profile. Attached is Mr. Ando's profile. Please review it with your daughter and respond with your interest level in an omii. Although Miss Shouko has yet to reach marriageable age, should both parties find themselves interested in pursuing that path, we are happy to facilitate the engagement and wait until Miss Shouko's 16th birthday for the wedding. Thank you again for choosing our company, and we eagerly await your reply. Sincerely, Kyosei Matchmaking Service. An omii, a meeting between a man and a woman, facilitated with the intention of the two of them discussing marriage. Shouko thinks she's going to throw up. Trembling hands look at the attached sheet detailing Ando's profile, and she genuinely does have to swallow back vomits. He's 27, oh god, his quirk is temperature resistance, and she understands now. Shouko knows exactly what her father meant. She understands what it is to be a Todoroki woman. Shouko drops the sheet, pressing her hands over her mouth and screaming, the noise muffled and raw as her panicking mind attempts to process everything. Her father is punishing her by forcing her into a quirk marriage. A child with half hot, half cold and a resistance to temperature weaknesses, burns and frostbite? They'd be unstoppable. She could always decline, try to push back, but Shouko knows how much money her father would be willing to spend to get his way. According to Natsuo, on the rare occasion she spoke to him after her training started, it was how he managed to get their mother to agree through money at the family until she was all but his. This is going to happen. If she doesn't bend back, become her father's perfect golden girl, push herself past safety and health and sanity to become the top hero. Oh god, she's becoming her mother. That's all it takes. Shouko breaks down in tears, body curling up next to the futon as she tries to muffle the noises of sobs into her knees. Maybe, her anguished and bitter mind supplies, maybe you're like her already. Can you really say you aren't crazy? Shouko can't answer, and that's what terrifies her to her core, a heart of ice shattering. What the fuck is she going to do? To say Shouko had thrown herself back into her training would be an understatement. She would run in the morning until she was almost vomiting, her sessions with the punching bag now stretching until she could hardly hold a pencil the next day from the deep ache in her knuckles, and she'd practiced with her quirk after school until a teacher actually had to come in and tell her to go home. Her father was no longer helping her, seemingly insistent on this bizarre form of punishment, so she did it all by herself. She needed to prove herself, had to save herself from the worst type of fate, and the sports festival would be her opportunity to show her father it wouldn't be worth it to force her into a marriage. There was, though, one thing Shouko knew was holding her back but was unable to bring herself to use her fire. It was illogical not to, she knew that. If Endeavor saw her use her flames, he'd surely reconsider, wouldn't he? And there was so much on the line. God knows her father would make her drop out of the hero course, if not out of school entirely, if it meant he'd get what he wanted. Shouko remembered being in middle school, curled up in her futon and biting her lip to avoid crying as she rolled over onto yet another raw burn. She remembered swearing to herself that she would not become him, that she'd win using only her mother's power. The only fate worse than turning into her mother would be to turn into her father. She cannot use his quirk. Shouko has a strange relationship with her feelings towards her mother. She loves her, she really does, in the way only the youngest child really can adore their mother. Rei Todoroki was a victim, put through hell all because of her quirk and the egotistical drive of a man with more money than morals. How could Shouko not mourn for both the loss of their relationship and for her mother's stolen life? She was a martyr, someone Shouko tried to emulate in appearance in order to remind her father of his failure as a husband, remain a ghost of the happy marriage he could have had if he wasn't obsessed with power. But on the other hand, her mother's betrayal left Shouko scarred, vision in her left eye still noticeably cloudy despite the surgeries. She couldn't take it any longer, and lashed out at a vulnerable and terrified child. Shouko had watched her take beatings without protest, and mixed with her sympathy was a bitter resentment. Fight back, Mama, fight back. Get us out of here, use your ice, Mama please, you need to fight. But she never had. Her mother had abandoned whoever she was before marriage, and Shuko's love was matched by her desire to resemble her mother in aesthetics alone. She would love the woman forever, but Shouko couldn't be her. Could it be you fear her still? Her rigorous training is interrupted only once 1 week before the sports festival, the date of her first omii. Fumi knew what was going on, and if the bruise Shouko saw sneaking out of her older sister's sleeve was any indication, she tried to talk her father out of it. Regardless, as Fumi tries to offer her a supportive goodbye as Shouko and her father stepped into the chauffeured car, all the bicolored girl can think is that she really wished her older sister wouldn't smile like she was holding back tears, which she probably was, frankly. It's a silent ride over to the omii company's main headquarters, a business running inside a charmingly Japanese-style home that reminds Shouko a bit of her own in both fashion and the way it carries an air of dread for her. She's brought into a back room by an older woman with some kind of fox quirk judging by the animal head and the tail, and Shouko finds it oddly fitting, like a kitsune, all done up in her kimono. Attendants greet them at the door, fussing over Shouko as they dress her in a furosode, all reds and whites and floral patterns that are far too bright and sunny for what feels like her funeral procession. Shouko wants to laugh when the makeup is bought out. What a change in tone it was from the last time someone had put makeup on her. There's no little errors or smudges like what happened with Fumi, and that makes it feel all too fake somehow. The face that stares back at her as the stylist moves onto her hair isn't Shouko's, even if they share the same scar and haunted look in their mismatched eyes. The real Shouko has a monolid, a freckle or old acne scar here and there, and her lips are cracked and thin. The imposter in the mirror has applied clear tape to achieve a double eyelid, her skin is without a single flaw, and her lips are red and plump. Close to the real girl in some aspects, but as her hair is pinned with a delicate red kanzashi, Shouko realizes she doesn't recognize her at all. A stranger. She's presented to her father, who walks her down to where she'll meet the man who may very well become her husband. The man hasn't said anything about removing her from the hero course yet. Shouko knows the more efficient option is for him to wrangle her back into submission and continue training her rather than setting her up with someone and waiting for her to eventually pop out of air with the right quirk. Even so, the mere possibility that she's going to have to go through with this is... Shouko forces the fear back, clenching her jaw and staring at Endeavor with ice in her eyes. I'll mess it up on purpose. I'll act rudely and be loud and obnoxious. Her father's gaze is cold as he examines his golden child-turned-bargaining chip. I don't think you want to learn what your third option is if you cannot either prove yourself capable of becoming my successor, or if you cannot bear one that will function as such. If you think this man is interested in you because of your actions rather than what you can give him, you don't understand how romance functions in the world you were made for. Shouko's stomach turns. He could be referring to so many things, her quirk, her wealth, her body, and none of them are good. She'd known on some level that a 27-year-old pursuing a child of 15 wouldn't truly care about a relationship as much as he would what he could get out of her. Not that Shouko ever expected herself to be in any relationship. As her father said, romance wasn't for people in her world, much less a happy one. But the terrifying prospect of being married off might be somewhat more tolerable if the man cared about something past her father's bank account or some perceived youthful innocence. She says nothing more, and neither does her father. Part of the reason this matchmaking company was chosen, aside from their willingness to brush aside one party being underage for a donation, was that their traditional building allowed for them to host the omii itself. An attendant was waiting outside a door, bowing before ushering Shouko inside. The girl shot one last look of anger at her father, wondering for a brief moment whether any of this could be real or if it was just a drawn-out punishment in the name of humiliating her. If it was the latter, it was working. As she was ushered inside, the first thing Shouko notices is the interior design. The room is traditionally Japanese like the rest of the building, an aesthetic she would have normally appreciated had it not been under these circumstances. Tatami floors connect to fusuma walls, and a shoji paper door is open to allow the mild air of spring inside. A garden is visible on the exterior, a snaking path leading through flowers and trees. It was exactly the type of room Shouko would expect it, omii to take place in. What draws her attention with a drop of her stomach, though, is the person seated at the shibudai in the center of the room. Hideyomi Ando is just as his image showed. Average height, blue hair in a clean and professional cut, and a slightly shimmering appearance on his visible flesh, the iridescent second skin that serves as his temperature resistance quirk. He's dressed in a kimono less formal than Shuko's, red with a deep blue haori. Shouko is quietly thankful he didn't go for the more traditional route and wear black and white with hakama. She's not sure she could handle looking at him dressed up like it was a wedding. He looks up at her and smiles, a completely ordinary and well-meaning expression that still churns Shuko's stomach. Miss Todoroki, it's a pleasure to meet you. He sounds like an adult, and Shouko feels like she's a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's clothes again as she bows stiffly. A pleasure to meet you as well. The attendant reminds them that they have 20 minutes booked before making her exit, leaving Shouko to kneel on the other side of the shibudai. It's a moment before she notices the teapot in the center, belatedly remembering that it's traditional for the woman to pour the tea as she hurries to pour 2 cups with a swiftness that indicates she's not very good at delicate movements. She has to shift awkwardly to avoid the long sleeves of the furosode from getting in the way. Ando smiles as he accepts his cup, sipping from it and seeming pleased with the taste. Thank you. Is this your first omii? It is. Shouko confirms, setting the teapot back down and silently wishing she had some kind of time quirk, anything that would let her zoom through 20 minutes as fast as she could. Ando seems to have expected that answer, nodding. Given your age, that makes sense. Even so, you're very mature for 15. His reply forces Shouko to focus hard so as not to grit her teeth. The snarky part of her wants to shoot back with thanks, it was the trauma, and is barely held in. Ando continues as much as she wants him to just shut up. You're in the UA Hero course, aren't you? That's very exciting. Was it your class that was involved in that awful incident with those villains? She shrugs, taking a sip of her tea. That was us. I'm glad you're fine. It would have been nothing short of a tragedy to lose a beauty like you before the world saw her. Shouko's hands tense around her cup, and Ando laughs gently. My apologies, I know I'm being direct. I was just fascinated by you the moment I was shown your profile. Mr. Ando, that's dash. Just Hideyomi is fine. Ando's reply thankfully cuts off the snappish response Shouko was about to give. It allows her to take a deep breath in and remember the etiquette briefing she'd been told about as her makeup was being done. Hideyomi. That's very flattering. She lies. Shouko's never been all that polite, even if her generally formal manner of speech hides it if you only talk to her briefly, so lying to keep the peace like this makes her teeth grind. Ando, and yes, she'll only refer to him as such in his head, he doesn't get first-name privileges in the privacy of her mind, smiles in response, putting down his teacup. Maybe it's flattering to you, but to me? It's the truth. You're very charming, Shouko. Okay, he said she could use his first name, but when the hell did she say he could use her first name? Ignoring the breach of etiquette, Shouko just nods. Thank you. Her teeth are grinding, muscles tense, and she almost jumps when she feels a sudden hand on her knee underneath the shibudai, a gentle touch that makes Shouko want to throw up. Really you are? It's unusual to get married so young, isn't it? It's traditional in the Todoroki lineage. That's not a complete lie. Her father was married at 20, the twins being born at 21, and her mother was just 18 for both events. That said, Shouko has no idea what Tuya is doing, Fuyumi is single, and Natsuo is 19 with a girlfriend of his own choice. She's the only one being groomed to marry this young, and the thought plus the hand rubbing her knee through her furosode makes her want to puke. His hand is still on her knee, sliding upwards inch by inch with the minute, and Shouko wants nothing more than to encase him in ice. Her father's threat rings heavy in her ears, though, and all she can do is clench her jaw harder and avoid Ando's eyes as he speaks. It makes sense for a traditional family like yours. What was your quirk again? Half hot, half cold, replies Shouko, who is taking a sip of her tea to avoid spitting out anything that would induce Endeavor's rage should it get back to him. Oh, that's right. Your father is the number 2 hero, isn't he? Ando smiles as if he didn't already know such a thing, as if he wasn't rubbing Shouko's thigh through the thick furosode. The density of the material doesn't prevent her stomach from twisting as she confirms it with a nod. That's pretty amazing, Shouko. No wonder you're aiming for heroism. My quirk isn't much use for combat, so it was never a path for me. Shouko takes a longer sip than is necessary, counting backwards in her head to keep herself calm. I was told that your father owns a support item company. Do you work there? I do. Climate Support Company. Ando confirms. The rubbing does not stop, but it has at least remained localized to her lower thigh. Any higher and Shouko doesn't think she could resist the urge to smack it off. I work high up in their human resources department, book clients' appointments with the designers, handle questions, all that stuff. We're major enough that I'm just too busy to try and find a good wife in a more modern way, huh? My father suggested this route, so here I am. Shouko guesses that being busy isn't the reason the rich, decent-looking Ando isn't married yet. He's clearly an experienced creep, able to keep chatting with her even as he's feeling her up. No woman who wasn't being held at metaphorical gunpoint would last more than a date. I see. Regardless, I'm glad I got you before someone else did. Ando chuckles to himself as if they were two friends sharing a joke. A pretty girl like you would get snapped up in a heartbeat? And somehow you think you're not the one snapping me up? Shouko thinks, biting her tongue viciously to avoid saying her thoughts. Is this what it was like for her mother, dealing with Endeavor? Constantly holding her true thoughts to her chest, nodding to placate someone they couldn't stand? Her gut twists as she realized this was the world faced by other women, a life marred by terms like glad I got you and hands that snuck up their legs. Shouko was a sheltered child, raised not by her gender but by her quirk, and she's starting to realize that it might be better to be controlled by someone aiming to make you his successor rather than controlled by someone aiming to make you his. How many other people have sat where Shouko is sitting, had their hearts break as they were forced by fate and finances and family to give themselves away to a stranger? Whose broken dream is she kneeling on? Whose broken dream is she kneeling on? The nerves are adorable. The hand moves from her thigh to where her hands are clasped in her lap, and Shouko makes an embarrassing yelping noise as the contact brings her back from her panicked train of thought. Ando is smiling, and she would like nothing more than to wipe it off his stupid face with a fist. Probably don't have any experience in romance, do you? There's a certain lasciviousness to his tone of voice, and that plus the way his hand has yet to leave Shouko's as they remain folded directly on her lap makes her heart stop. I have no experience. She savors the sound of no, even if it's not the way she wants to say it. Over the years, Shouko has gotten good at reading facial cues. It was a survival tactic growing up. Could she push her father's buttons now, or did that little twitch of the eyebrow mean she'd be crawling to the healer with a broken leg? Was now a good time to tell him she accidentally broke her cell phone, or would she be getting stitches instead of bruises? And now as Shouko watches Ando's smile grow ever so slightly, she knew it clear as day. He had made a decision on her, and it was one that would lead her down the path of Todoroki. I see. So beautiful and yet you've never had a boyfriend? It's not surprising that the number 2 hero would raise such a proper young lady. Shouko really thinks she's going to either hit him, scream, or hit him while screaming, so she thanks whatever deity has taken pity on her as there's a gentle knock on the door. Ando's hand retreats, the subtle predatory glaze in his smile replaced by a charming businesslike grin as the attendant slides open the door. Miss Todoroki, Mr. Ando? 20 minutes have concluded. Time flies when you're enjoying yourself. Ando gets to his feet, moving around the table to offer Shouko a hand up. In the name of appearances, she accepts, even if the satisfaction of smacking it away would be earth-shattering. It was a pleasure to meet you, Shouko. I look forward to our next meeting. You as well, Hideyomi. Biting her tongue and tolerating the hand that holds her own for a little too long, Shouko can feel the tension leave her body as they're led in different directions down the hallway. She almost wants to hug the attendant, but that would be weird for more than one reason. Unfortunately, all released tension returns as they round a corner and are met with Endeavor in the waiting room, the man seated in a chair that seems too small for his massive form. Shouko allows herself to zone out, a common technique she utilizes whenever the stress becomes nigh unbearable, and enjoys the peace of the fuzz in her head and the lightness of her body. It was called dissociation. She thinks from the time she mentioned it in middle school and was given a confused stare and a mandatory counselor trip, and it's Shouko's comforting friend up until she's forced to snap out of it by a hand on her shoulder guiding her to the change room. Her hair is let down, the makeup washed off, and Shouko marvels at how much work was spent on her appearance for just 20 minutes in a tea room. Slowly, the real Shouko returns as the parts that made up that peculiar imposter are plucked away, and she's back in the white blouse and pleated red skirt Fumi had lent her. Apparently her usual outfit selections of sweatpants and a tank top weren't appropriate to wear, which is just confusing considering she had to change anyways. Her father is waiting for her as she's lead to the chauffeured car, looking at her expectantly. Well, he's a pervert. Shouko blurts out as she feels the rumble of the engine, pent-up anger in her chest threatening to burst through the seatbelt. He felt me up and got all excited when he figured out I've never had a boyfriend. You're not serious about this. It's a punishment. Is that what you think? Endeavor rolls his eyes from the front seat. Both members of the Todoroki clan know how much their driver is paid not to ask questions and to keep his mouth shut, know there will be no consequences no matter what is discussed in his presence. If you really do believe this is an elaborate punishment, you're even more foolish than I previously believed. Hideyomi Ando comes from a wealthy family who run a famous support company, and his quirk mixed with yours would create a child worthy of being my successor. Achi, are you serious? Shouko slaps the side of the door, her generally emotionless face awash with wide-eyed disbelief. All Might will have retired long before I'm old enough to have a baby, even longer before any child I have would be old enough to take up heroism. This was why Shouko still believed it was a scare tactic, the 15 or so years it would take to raise a child to the age where they could enter a hero school. He was bluffing, right? Fixing her with a glare, Endeavor scowls at his youngest daughter. You had your little incident just last week. I could have a suitable heir by next September if you're married in January. What do? Shouko trails off, processing that. And though she will hate herself for the display of weakness later that night when she is alone and biting her wrists in rage, for now all she can do is let her jaw drop in horror. I'm not until I'm 18 at least, I dash. Your 16th birthday is in January. That's the marriage age for a woman. Why do you think you'll be exempt from motherhood? The car is slowing to a stop outside the Todoroki estate, and Shouko hysterically wonders how much the driver is going to have to drink tonight to forget this. I did a good thing for you, training you as my successor and trying to keep you from this life. But because of your ungrateful insolence, you'll create my heir instead. Dad dash. Shouko whisper shouts, and she can't remember the last time she referred to the old man as anything but father or his hero name, and it speaks volumes as to how desperate this situation is. The car is off, parked, and Shouko launches herself forwards to grab at her father's arm in the front seat in a final display of humiliating desperation. Dad, no, you're lying, you're not really dash. Crunch. The arm grab wasn't her wisest move in hindsight. With a fiery glare, Endeavor sends his elbow back into Shouko's nose, the girl flying backwards and hitting her head off the bulletproof glass of the window. Do not think grabbing at me like a child having a tantrum will change a single thing. If you prove yourself worthy of being seen as my heir again, I will call the arrangement off. Until then, this is your fate. I'm being generous by offering this choice after the stunts you've pulled since starting high school. Do not make me regret it. Opening his car door, the man exits with a heated, literally, slam. Shouko takes a moment to partake in some hyperventilation in the back seat of the car, trying not to choke on the blood running down her nose as she finally throws her own door open and runs out, not even bothering to close it. When she bursts through the front doors, Fumi is waiting anxiously in the front room beside the newly purchased replacement kotatsu, and her face blanches as she sees Shouko running in, eyes wide like a feral animal and blood dripping down the front of her face. Shouko, your nose dash. The younger girl cuts her off, looking at the blur that is her older sister. Shouko's vision always gets worse as she panics, the cloudiness of her damaged left eye almost feeling like it's spreading. She feels Fumi hold her to her chest, hears her start to hurriedly rush through the mindfulness techniques she usually used whenever things like this happened, but Shouko can't really process it. Her hands are clenched at her sides, shaking, and her nose burns even as Fumi activates her quirk slightly to cool Shouko's body down. She doesn't do that unless the injury is bad, some hysterical part of Shouko notes. Her body was suited for fire but can only use ice in a reversal of her twin brother's condition. Good God, how bad does her nose look? She's thankful for the pain in a way, thankful for the way it draws her focus away from blurred vision and the terrifying mental image of herself with a swollen stomach. Where will your child's burn be? Will they scream or will they cry first? What kind of color will your room be in the psych ward? Shouko doesn't fight as she's guided down the hall and out the side door towards the healer's quarters, a mess of shaking breath and horror and a vicious battle to try and ice over her raw heart. It doesn't work. Now that she's seen firsthand what fate she's plummeting towards, Shouko trains even harder. She starts neglecting schoolwork. Her English marks won't matter if she's forced to drop out of school, after all, and tossing homework aside to spend the time excessively exercising. Recovery girl's warning rings once in her mind before she silences it. Perhaps damaged fertility would be a blessing at this point. At least that way, if the worst-case scenario came along, she wouldn't be able to be used as an incubator. Shouko obsessively watches every past sports festival, watching each event and doing her best to train her body for each one. She has no idea what will happen this year. It's part of the appeal of the festival, not knowing what you'll be witnessing until the day itself, and the stakes are too high to take a chance by ignoring certain events. Though he hasn't said it out loud, it's unspoken that Endeavor wants nothing short of first place from her in order to withdraw his marriage threat. All that said, she's human and she has a limit. 3 days before the sports festival, she passes out coming home from an extended jog that was preceded by 2 hours of strength training and 3 hours of quirk usage after school. Fumi, in the newly learned teenage slang Shouko is inadvertently picking up by nature of sitting within earshot of Hantashiro, flips her shit. So now her sister's pleading for her to take a break for the rest of the day has landed the bicolored girl in her bedroom, Fumi's carefully prepared dinner of champan and shagiyaki sitting half-eaten beside her futon. So much has happened lately that Shouko can't even determine what she's supposed to be feeling right now. She's not good at emotions at the best of times, and this is objectively the worst of times. In the middle of considering whether or not she could get away with doing some push-ups in here, her phone buzzes with a text. Natsuo, yo lil sis. Natsuo, Nason told me you weren't doing so hot. Natsuo, I wanted to check in and see if that's improved at all. Natsuo, asterisk improved. Natsuo, goddamn I have fat fingers. Natsuo, this was unexpected. Most things involving the middle Todoroki child were unexpected, honestly. He was never part of Shouko's life, not by choice, she thinks, but by necessity. If Fumi hovering too close to her for too long would spur Endeavor's rage, God knows the anger that would erupt if a quirkless sibling risked influencing his precious creation. Their dinner a few weeks ago helped in humanizing the ghost that was Natsuo, so this doesn't feel as unnatural as it would otherwise, but it's still hard for Shouko to process. It takes her a minute to formulate her reply, tired mind not sure what to say. Shouko, I'm as well as I could be in the situation. Natsuo, that's good to hear. Natsuo, prep pin for the sports FES I assume? Me and my uni buddies are watching it together and my money's on you. Choosing to settle into bed despite it only being 8 p.m., Shouko pulls the blanket up to her chest as she settles into the futon, phone held above her face. Hopefully she wouldn't drop it, her nose was still gradually healing from the omii incident, and the last thing she needed was an injury via cell phone. Shouko, I am. Father isn't training me right now, so I'm doing it myself. Natsuo, hell yeah kid get that bread. Natsuo, also this is less fun but like. Natsuo, I just want to let you know that I don't know the whole story ABTU and Endeavor are in, but Nason told me enough and I'm sorry that you are going through this. It's illegal and if the resident flaming trash bag didn't have enough money and influence to silence it I'd be sprinting to the cops. Natsuo, but please no worst comes to worst, I have a sleeping bag and some spare floor space in my dorm room. Natsuo, you can come if he tries to make you live with someone else. You and isn't both. If that isn't the most tempting thing she's heard in months. Shouko notes that his last comment indicates Natsuo most likely knows about the marriage threat Fumi probably told him, and Shouko doesn't blame her. The older girl likely needed someone to vent to after the omii incident. Shouko, I'll remember that. Natsuo, good. I know we didn't see each other much as kids, but I'm still your brother. Natsuo, asterisk brother. Natsuo, fucking fat fingers again. I'm trying to be sentimental and they're barging in like they own the place. Natsuo, but yes, I care about you and JSYK. I know Dad's social media passwords, and if you want me to log into his Twitter and block Best Jeanist just to start drama, I will. That actually makes her smile, and Shouko ponders actually telling him to do it. Shouko, it might be funnier if you blocked someone like Hawks or Mirko. They would call him out on it. Shouko, but either way, no thank you for now. Natsuo, Autumn. Natsuo, for real though, in regards to both blocking the pussycats or whoever and coming to stay with me. Putting her phone down for now, Shouko tries to settle down for sleep. She's bone tired, has been for the past 2 weeks, but her mind is so full of, well, everything. At least this time, that everything's are good. Natsuo's kindness, Fuyumi's tenderness, and why. She'd been a specter in her siblings' lives, the golden child that was so far above both of them. So why do they even care about her? How can they be so kind when she herself turned out as this shadow of a girl? A part of Shouko suggests that it was because they were spared from the violence and she wants to smack that part of herself because of how untrue it is. As if they weren't both constantly and subtly on edge to avoid getting in their father's way and evoking his anger. As if the bruises they bore when they failed to do so were fake. As if Shouko doesn't remember 4 months ago, hearing a sobbing Fuyumi frantically trying to talk Natsuo down from something involving bleach over the phone, hearing the I already lost one brother, please Natsuo, please, I can't lose two, because that's completely normal behavior from functional adults who were never neglected and made to feel like they were nothing. The everything stopped being good. Shouko's entire body clenches as she hears the garage door open, and her eyes flitters to the window, then to her closet where her emergency bag was hidden, stocked with granola bars, bottles of water, some clothes, and 20,000 yen in cash. There's a moment of contemplation before she picks up her phone again. Shouko, can any time be right now? Natsuo's dorm is small but thankfully private. It looks how she suspected a university boy's room to look: posters of sports stars and musicians on the walls, papers and a closed laptop strewn about on a small desk, and a mess of clothes on the floor, though it looks like he politely shoved them all to one side of the room after Shouko announced her intended visit. The pizza he'd ordered despite her insistence that she'd had championed to eat already. It's fine. No, Fuyumi is just exaggerating when she says I've only had a couple bites, arrived minutes before Shouko did, and she does have to admit it's pretty tasty right now. Though there's no kitchen in his dorm room, there's a mini fridge and a little foldable table set up in anticipation for her arrival, and she's seated across from Natsuo now as the two eat. Seriously, I'm glad you came. Natsuo says over munches of pepperoni that he picks off then eats. It's one of many strange habits she has witnessed either last dinner or tonight, like how he carefully separates different foods so that they don't touch and will eat all of one food at once then move on to its neighbor, never alternating bites. 9 p.m. pizza for no reason is, like, the classic university experience. It's good. I haven't had pizza in a long time, probably around 4 years, but Shouko doesn't count that closely. Natsuo grins, still holding his slice and talking as he gets up to check that the door is locked. He's done it about 5 times not counting now, and Shouko's only been here 20 minutes, but whatever. She doesn't mind. See? I'm the coolest sibling. I feed you pizza? Wani-san feeds me zaru soba. Touché. Her brother sits back down, reaching for another slice, but his eyes are on Shouko. So did anything in particular make you have to come here? Or was it just kind of a fuck it, let's go moment? The latter. Shouko shrugs. I heard father coming home and just kind of stuffed my school uniform in my escape bag and jumped out the window. Natsuo laughs over his food. Goddamn your metal. But oh man, the escape bags. I still have mine even though I don't need it anymore. It's comforting. It was Fuyumi's idea, implemented when Shouko was still a first year in middle school. She'd insisted it would be fine, it was just a precaution in case of a villain attack and absolutely nothing else, but maybe they should put some food and money in a little secret bag so that they could grab it and go if they needed to. Shouko's was currently sitting on the floor by the door, the girl having grabbed it and then shimmied out her window and onto the ground. It wasn't that high of a drop, Plus, she'd tested the jump once before just in case of a situation exactly like this. One train ride and a phone call to let Fumi know what was going on, and though her sister fretted over Shuko's choice, she didn't argue when she informed the older girl she was staying with Natsuo, and now she was in her brother's dorm room. Shouko chooses to parrot Fumi's words from years ago. Well, if there's a villain attack or something, you can use it. Sure can. Villain attacks are something else. Natsuo rolls his eyes, sarcasm evident in his tone and half-smile, as he gets up to check the lock again. I think it's locked, Onii-san. Shouko supplies. Her brother nods as he fiddles with the lock, grinning sheepishly. I know. I just like double-checking with this kind of stuff. Finding it unsurprisingly locked, Natsuo turns back around with a smile. Pizza was good, but you know what goes best with it? Seeing Shuko's cocked head, a silent indicator of her thoughts, Natsuo smiled wider and clapped his hands. Have you ever played Mario Kart? Natsuo groaned overdramatically as he rolled out the sleeping bag. Are you sure you haven't secretly been playing Mario Kart in your sleep or something? You kicked my ass? A small smile graces Shuko's lips as she crawls into bed. She'd argued with him when she realized his text didn't mean she'd be sleeping on the floor. He fully intended to give her the bed. Shouko wasn't about to force poor Natsuo into a sleeping bag by imposing on him so suddenly, but his reminder that she needed the best sleep possible for the sports festival in a couple days finally meant she caved and agreed to take it. Maybe you're just terrible? It was easy to talk to Natsuo. He was so casual and carefree, though Shouko remembered a more sullen boy when he lived at home. Being free from Endeavor's clutches completely must have done wonders for him. Though Shouko still remembers that phone call she wasn't supposed to hear, pressed up against the wall outside the kitchen to listen to Fumi plead with him to not do whatever it is he was planning, and wonders how much of this is an act for her sake. Hopefully not very much, and she decides to interpret his stuck-out tongue and display of false anger as the jokes of a happy boy. I'm banning you from picking Rainbow Road ever again, you sadist. I'm only ever going to pick Rainbow Road next time. The concept of there being a next time warms Shuko's heart in the best possible way. She wants to do this again, have fun and talk to her brother and watch his strange little habits decrease as he adjusts to her presence. Natsuo hasn't stopped checking the lock on the door or window, but it's decreased a lot since they started the game. In fact, while he'd turned the console on 3 times in a row, he turned it off normally at the end. Shuko's not sure why, but she thinks that's good. Natsuo rolls his eyes, unzipping the bag and starting to get in. Boo. And I let you borrow my shirt and everything. It's true, Shouko realized that she didn't actually have pajamas in her escape bag when she walked over to the public bathrooms down the hall to change. In turn, Natsuo lent her one of his old t-shirts. It was a bright orange and had a strange symbol on the front, black and shaped sort of like a peen with a feathered tail. When she'd asked, her brother had simply told her it was some foreign sports team he liked. It was way too big for her, Natsuo's naturally stockier body trained by American football and jogging, meaning that his top hung off her like a dress. Shouko loved it. The shorts were actually his girlfriend's, gray and made of comfy terry cloth, and were vital to Shuko's playful retort. But your girlfriend gave me these shorts. I wonder how she mysteriously forgot her pants in your bedroom. Natsuo's cheeks go red before he laughs loudly, throwing a pillow at Shouko. Hey, don't you go insinuating gross stuff. Little shit. It's the first time she's heard that term used lovingly, and it makes Shuko's face heat up like Natsuo's, though it's out of a nearly embarrassing joy on her part. There's a pause from the boy before he speaks. I didn't know your blush did that. Did what? Shouko touches her face, not knowing what he's talking about. It's uneven. Like, your left cheek gets a lot redder than your right one. He tilts his head, examining it. Shouko has never heard or witnessed this, but she also almost never blushes. Shifting so she can see into the mirror on the other side of Natsuo's room, she's surprised to see that it's true. Where her left side is rosy red, spreading from her cheek to one side of her nose, the right is more subdued, looking more like she was just cold. I've never noticed that before. It's bizarre to say the least, and there's a pause before the metaphorical light bulb moment. Oh, my quirk. It must have to do with my heat distribution through the 2 sides. Oh, that explains why Nei-sen never blushes even when she's super flustered. Quirk biology. Natsuo smacks a fist into his closed palm. We're geniuses. Let's open a detective business. Shuko's lips curl in a small smile. Well, all we had to do was look at our biology. It's an aspect of our family. There's a beat and Shouko quickly realizes her mistake. I mean dash. Natsuo raises a hand to silence her, looking more amused than anything. Save it, save it. You don't gotta apologize, I'm pretty weak to hot weather anyways, so it's mostly true. Quirklessness is uncommon enough that it's easy to forget that there's nearly 1,600,000,000 people on the planet who don't have any sort of power. It's rare in East Asia. Shouko remembers from the rigorous studying for the entrance exam. It's because the first Quirk user was from China. Quirks spread out from that region, and her nation was just a small sea apart. Japan's real quirkless population is closer to 9% than 20%. Shouko does not know why she remembers these things, but then recalls the frantic way she'd studied to ensure she'd pass the exceptionally challenging UA recommendations written exam, and suddenly understands why the facts are so deeply burned into her brain. Natsuo never talked to her enough to really discuss his quirklessness, so she was worried he'd take offense by her forgetfulness. The boy didn't seem to care though, chuckling as he settled into his sleeping bag. People always treat it like some kind of rare disease or disability. I'm quirkless, not sick. There was a pause, Shouko trying to figure out how to phrase this in a way that wouldn't insult the brother who had given her kindness she did not deserve. She only knew one quirkless person, a boy in middle school, and she only knew of his status due to the immense bullying he underwent. She never knew his name, just knew that he was quirkless and had a haunted look in his eyes. He transferred out in second year, and Shouko never saw him again. Was this how life went for Natsuo? Were people cruel to you growing up? Yup. His laugh carries both the sadness of someone who has faced immense cruelty and the peace of someone who has escaped it to find their place in the world. Shouko doesn't know if it's because of the bullying or their father. Just normal kid bullying but with an actual motive. Flowers on my desk, getting the crap kicked out of me in the bathroom, so on and so forth. It ended up slowing down a lot when I joined the football team in middle school. Turns out bullies don't want to try insulting you to your face when the quirkless kid's got a furious football team behind him. But it was bad for a while. I didn't know. Shouko admits. She's the furthest thing from quirkless, cursed by fire and blessed by ice, and she was never afforded the mental stamina to worry about others when she had her own hell at home to deal with. Natsuo shrugs. I mean, the old bastard kept us away from each other. Makes enough sense that you didn't know. It's the first time their years of isolation have been brought up all night, and Shouko knows it would be awkward if he didn't immediately follow up with even so, you're still my sister, you know? Nei-san and I want you to be happy. At this point, Shuko's not certain that's an emotion she can process for longer than a happy hour or so before the guarded emptiness returns to fill her mind with static and thoughts that spiral. Even so, it's a nice statement, and she nods. Thank you. As an afterthought, the girl adds, I want you to be happy too. Now that I'm out? I think I'm pretty happy. Natsuo grins. And it only happened 'cause Endeavor was all pissy over his kid not having powers. Being quirkless might have been the best thing that happened to me. Shouko cocks her head. You don't want a quirk? As a kid I did, says her brother. I just wanted to be like everyone else, have some cool ice or fire to show off, you know? But now it's the reason I never have to see our garbage old man again. I'm happy with who I am now. Not to mention after the thing with Nice. Well, a quirk that hurts your body is never good. I was kinda grateful I didn't get something like that. What was he like? Shouko asks before she can stop herself. Omii-san. Never saw much of him. Natsuo's smile turns a bit softer and subdued. He reminds her of Fumi like this. He was nice. Rough around the edges, maybe, but he was a really cool older brother. I bet he's out there traveling freely, you know? Backpacking and stuff. Hell, he probably doesn't live in Japan anymore. He had a huge soft spot for you, even if you don't remember it. Hopefully one day we can all meet up. That would be nice. The four of them hanging out somewhere and chatting like normal siblings over coffee or something. What a strange fantasy. Shuko's pondering was interrupted as she heard Natsuo yawn loudly. "Wah, it's only 11 and I'm ready to sleep. I used to be up till 2 most nights last year." Natsuo stretches his arms, the audible crack in his shoulder making Shouko wince. "I have an 8 a.m. class tomorrow, so if you want I'll wake you up by 6:30 or whatever. So you can get ready for school and hop on the train." "Sure." This night will end, and Shouko will go back to her self-imposed routine, her heart frozen over once again. But as Natsuo gets up to turn off the lights, on and off 3 times, what's with the threes? The bicolored girl is able to remind herself that she's sleeping somewhere safe, just a few feet away from someone who cares for her even if she doesn't understand why. It's peculiar, but Shouko decides it's a mystery she can leave unsolved as she closes her eyes and drifts off. One of the very few benefits of her father no longer training Shouko was that all she got when she saw him at home the evening after her abrupt sleepover at Natsuo's was a pointed glare before he went back to whatever it was he was working on. You'd think she could also add less sore and tireds to that list of good things, but her own self-imposed routine ensured that this was not the case. Shouko knew the stakes of the sports festival were too high to slack off, that she needed to prove herself here to keep even the smallest semblance of freedom in her life. And as the day of the event proper starts off, she is ready, feeling the ice flow beneath her skin as she prepares herself for the fight ahead. The train ride is high tension, multiple other students, mostly Gen Ed, though she sees a hero course boy who looks too old to be in her grade, wearing an intense expression and cropped dark hair, also making the commute full of nerves and determination. Shouko is content to just look out the window on the trip, serenity only broken when she gets a text. "Natsuo, good luck Chocolat. Me and the squad are rooting for you." Lonnie even used her quirk on her hair for spiritual support. "Let the hair energy flow through you." Attached is a selfie of Natsuo grinning broadly as he and multiple other posing students sit around a TV in someone's dorm. To his right sits his girlfriend, Lonnie Murakami, if she remembers that name correctly, a pretty dark-skinned girl with kinky curls puffed out around her chin. She's flashing a peace sign, hair colored half red, half white. Shouko smiles despite herself, and even if she's not able to afford to think about much but the competition, she does manage to provide a selfie of herself in return. It's just a straight shot of her with a small smile, but she hopes it at least makes Natsuo happy. "Shouko, she wore it better." "Natsuo, Lonnie said you take selfies from the angle of a middle-aged mom and also that shed dye for you." Shouko's moment of happiness is interrupted by a scoff and a humorless chuckle to her left. Turning her head, Shouko engages in a glaring match with the boy sitting beside her for a minute before he rolls his eyes, muttering something about the hero course and priorities as he turns away. Wasn't that the purple-haired kid who had challenged her class some time ago? Whatever. She'd be surprised if he made it past the first round. Turning back to the window, Shouko zoned out for the rest of the ride. The stadium is just as magnificent as it looks on TV, but the change rooms and class waiting rooms are a bit plain. Even so, the buzz of energy can be felt through the entirety of Class 1A as they partake in their own little rituals to prepare themselves for the trials ahead. Shouko has no doubt that they all have their spots on the coveted podium, but she knows she'll be the one taking first this time around. She has to. These lucky fools, living in a world where they had a choice. She'd show them. Speaking of, there was one person in particular Shouko needed to talk to. She'd thought of the power she'd seen during training at the USJ, and she knows exactly what's happening here. This is the person she needs to beat to prove herself. Eyes scanning around the room, her gaze settles on the bundle of nerves talking to Uraraka and Ida. Striding over, Shouko calls out a few feet from the target. "Midoriya? Icha?" The girl seems surprised, turning around with a swish of her long ponytail. The yellow ribbon holding it up had 2 loops that reminded Shouko of a certain hero's hairstyle, and she almost wants to laugh at how obvious her theory is. "Yes, Todoroki? If we're looking at this objectively, I'm stronger than you." She folds her arms over her chest, ignoring the way the room has quieted down to listen to this strange exchange. Midoriya looks confused, face seeming almost apologetic for some reason. "I guess so. And even so, All Might's interested in you, isn't he?" Seeing the girl's eyes widen, Shouko cuts her off. It's obvious, so don't lie. The smaller girl gulps, and Shouko uses her height advantage, almost 7 inches taller, to loom over Midoriya. And no, I don't think he's particularly paying attention to me. Keep that act up if you want. I'm just letting you know that I'm going to beat you. Not caring about how impolite it is, Shouko stares Midoriya dead in the eyes before turning on her heels and starting to stride off. However, she's barely made it a few steps before a tiny, determined voice speaks up. Todoroki, I don't know what compelled you to do all that just now, because of course you're stronger than me right now. You're one of the most capable people in this class, if not the most capable. I'm so far behind you. Hey, no need to put yourself down like that, Midoriya. Kirishima pushes out his chair, getting in between the two, but Midoriya boldly steps aside to keep eye contact with the bicolored girl. No, Kirishima. It's okay. I need to let her know that even if I'm far behind her right now. Midoriya inhales deeply, fists clenching. For some reason, Shouko remembers a line from one of the books they had to study in literature last week. Though she be but little, she is fierce. I'm coming up faster than you're anticipating. And I'm going to give this everything I have. That all but confirms Shouko's theory, this girl and all might. Well, that surge of determination from such an unassuming person has all but confirmed it. Todoroki simply raises a brow. We'll see. She can hear Bakugo make an angry noise to her side, but before the boy can start anything, there's a knock on the door and a muffled call that Class 1A needs to get moving towards the gates. No more time for her declarations of war, the battle is starting. An obstacle course? Shouko practiced specifically for that one, and as everyone takes their positions, she knows what her opening move needs to be. In practiced form, she's sweeping through the bottleneck and weaving between running students with the grace of someone who has grown up learning how to dodge in the blink of an eye. As soon as she's near to the front of the pack, she inhales, allowing the familiar ice to fill her senses before whisking an arm back, freezing the ground up to everyone's ankles. The cries of confusion and anger confirm that Shouko got them, and the girl takes an easy lead. Present Mike yells something about her, but she's tuning him out. His voice is grating. The robots are no trouble, nor is passing the gorge. Shouko imagines the look on her father's face as she makes it to first with solely her ice, proving to him that she can be number one with half her quirk and showing him that she's worth holding on to. Her thoughts of victory are interrupted, however, by a screech of anger behind her. A quick look over her shoulder confirms her thoughts. Bakugo is catching up, propelling himself via his explosions. Grimacing, Shouko sped up, allowing ice to flood just in front of her as she skated forwards. She could beat him, she was sure of it, but that minefield up ahead seemed mildly problematic. Shouko started weaving through the field. The mines were slightly visible just as Present Mick's last yodeling announcement had said they'd be. It would just be a matter of making sure she didn't step on one. It was clever, Shouko mused. Those in the front were now at a disadvantage. Must make for good TV, seeing all the shakeups that would result from this. But as long as she watched her step, goddammit, Bakugo was loud. Swiveling her head, Shouko was barely able to dodge a viciously grinning Bakugo as he allowed his explosions to propel himself forwards. As he got directly next to her, he shot the girl a nasty smile. Your declaration of war was to the wrong goddamn person, Icy Hot. Icy Hot? Gritting her teeth, Shouko barely leapt out of the way of a close-range explosion, the heat singing her arm. She was lucky to avoid landing on a mine, but a quick retrace of her steps leads Shouko to grab Bakugo's arm, icing it over. He melted it quickly, and she went back again with a palm strike that turned into a normal slap as the furious boy dodged back and retaliated with an explosion to the stomach. Everything was moving fast, ice countered by flame, but Shouko was used to this. Violence was something that ran through her veins, but it looked as if it ran through Bakugo's too if his attacks were anything to go by. She had no time to wonder what his home life might have consisted of as she flicked her gaze to the ground in front of her, to Bakugo and back to the ground, watching for mines while dodging attacks and landing hits of her own. Just as she was coating her fist in ice with the intention of delivering an uppercut, an explosion nearly sent both of the combatants stumbling to the ground. In fact, they'd both have fallen directly onto a mine had they not grabbed each other at the last minute, pulling and shoving to stay stabilized in the most bizarre case of accidental teamwork to date. Both heads swiveled back to see the cause of such a powerful explosion, and was that Midoriya? Shouko found herself agreeing with Mike on this one. What just happened? The girl went soaring by on what looked like a piece of scrap metal, surpassing them both, and Bakugo screeched in anger as he blasted himself upwards to try and catch her. Suddenly realizing she'd been left in third, Shouko slammed a foot down and sent forth an ice path to run over. She'd hesitated to do so beforehand, knowing how it would help the people behind her, but there was no time to worry about that now. She had to focus on the two in front of her. Running alongside Bakugo's flying blasts, she had no more intention to fight him for now, and it seemed like a shared opinion. Shouko moved as quickly as her legs would take her, going for the sprint as Midoriya tumbled down. She adjusted her ice path to ensure the girl wouldn't land on it and not set off a bomb as she fell. Down went the scrap metal, and there was a sudden tickle. Shouko blinked in shock as, for that brief moment in time, Midoriya's long ponytail brushed against her nose. The girl was falling headfirst in between her and Bakugo. One thought crossed Shouko's mind, and then there was a pain on her shoulder and a blinding light. Shouko and Bakugo's yelps harmonized in a way that might have been comical had she not just been blasted by at least 4 bombs. When her head stopped spinning and the smoke cleared, all she could see was Midoriya in the distance, a tiny body getting smaller as she rushed even closer to the exit. Darting forwards, Shouko's legs moved in a dead sprint. She had to win, Aizawa's voice rang over the announcements, and for some reason, one phrase hit Shouko's heart. Each of them is driven by some desire to succeed. Oh, erase her head. It's not a desire anymore. It's a need. Shouko did what she wished she had done years ago. She ran. She pumped her arms back as a frenzy of emotion overtook her, running like her life depended on it, and in a way, it did. She was shorter than Bakugo, form leaner, and it gave her the speed advantage, passing him by. Midoriya was only 30 or so feet away. The girl stockier with muscle than Shouko, she could catch up. 25-20, worthless legs. Faster. 15-10 dash. Midoriya ripped through the gate 5 seconds before Shouko. She had lost to her. Catching her breath as she almost stumbled through the gate, Shouko's thoughts were in a frenzy. It was okay, she could catch up, could she though? This was horrible, but her father would accept it as long as she won first overall, right? God, she hoped so. Watching Midoriya tear up as the cameras focused on her, clearly overjoyed with her own victory, Shouko clenched her fists. Of course. That girl was from the world where crying was acceptable, where comforting friends like Uraraka and Ida would join her side, where she was doing all of this because of her own free will. Nobody puppeteered Izumi Midoriya, and Shouko thought she might hate the other girl for it. And without even using her quirk? What kind of reckless confidence did this fool have? She had no right. And yet, she thought back to the moment when Midoriya's long hair hit her face, one thought that escaped before the explosions that nearly brought her to her knees. In that moment, Shouko had smelt plenty of fresh dirt, the foul burning sugar of nitroglycerin, and the ever-familiar salt of sweat. But for a moment, there had been peach-scented shampoo, soft and mild. It had smelt good. Shouko turned her back to Midoriya, walking away and silencing her head with the comforting static. At least in the context of the festival itself, second place was better than first in the long run. It didn't mean it would be good when Shouko encountered her father, but it was good when everyone was rushing to her side and begging to be on her team. She had the pick of the litter, and so far everything was going perfectly. The cavalry battle involved teamwork, yes, but so far her team had done an excellent job of listening to her orders. With a minute left, they had the 10 million points, leaving Team Midoriya in the literal and figurative dust thanks to Ida's recipro burst. That said, they were currently immobilized as a result. But even as Team Midoriya turned on their heels and rushed them, Shouko was confident they'd keep it. Uraraka would get her team disqualified if she tried to float any of Shouko's team members. The support girl didn't seem to have any combat-suited quirk. Midoriya herself would shatter herself if she tried using that oh-so-familiar quirk, and Tokoyami was easy to repel via Kaminari. And yet, as they approached in a dead rush, Shouko's eyes widened. Midoriya's arm was lighting up in green, swinging back. What the hell was that idiot doing? It must have been a last, desperate choice for her. Shouko scolded herself for not seeing it coming. That would shatter her ice easy, and she was way too close, and Ida was yelling and she could feel Kaminari stumble and Yaoyorozu gasped and Shuko's left side lit up, a huge gust of wind blowing the flames away even as they coated her arm protectively. In the moment of shocked stillness, Midoriya yanked away a headband, Velcro scratching her neck as it was torn off. When her teammates yelling yanked her back to reality, Shouko scrambled to check around her neck. Had they known, they hadn't grabbed the 10 million. Breathing a sound of relief, Shouko cranked her head around to see that Team Midoriya was figuring it out at the same time. Midoriya's panicked shout for them to rush Team Todoroki obvious. Shouko grit her teeth, a flurry of emotions hitting her like a truck, but still focused on the fight. Yaoyorozu, more insulation. Kaminari, get ready to discharge. The twinkling sound of creation started up, the hair on Shuko's arms rose with static electricity as Kaminari charged up. Oh, for fuck's sake, when did Bakugo get here? And there's so much going on at once that her head is spinning and the noise is, oh, okay. The match is over. Bakugo hits the ground inelegantly. Shouko takes a minute to catch her breath as her team chatters excitedly, adrenaline slowly draining out as they realize they'd gotten first place. Thank goodness. Shouko ignores the world around her, eyes searching the crowd for her father. He's not hard to find, but he's also too far away to see clearly, and Shuko's eyesight doesn't help that. His expression just isn't readable, but Shouko has a bad feeling about it anyways. Tearing her eyes off him, Shouko instead walks over to Midoriya, the girl drying her tears as Midnight announces a break. Midoriya. Wet eyes flick to her, confused and slightly intimidated. We need to talk. Oh man, oh man, oh man, what's Izumi supposed to do? Todoroki had all but dragged her down this unused entrance instead of going to lunch, and the two of them have been standing here, the bicolored girl just staring. Izumi really hopes she doesn't look as nervous as she feels, but realizes with a gulp that she definitely looks like she's going to pass out. Todoroki was confusing? She was always so distant from everyone else, like there was some unspoken barrier between them. All her reactions were a little strange, randomly tensing up over movements or grabbing people who snuck up on her. And how did she not know what a period was until it happened? It was like Todoroki lived on another planet her whole life, an alien to human culture. Would Ishido find that funny or insulting? Not to mention that completely uncalled for challenge. She was just such a wild card in her reactions. And yet, Izumi often felt the uncomfortable gaze of eyes on her back, different from the waves of bad energy that she got when she knew Mineta was ogling her. A few glances confirmed that it was always Todoroki with her gaze fixed on her. It made Izumi really nervous. Well, a lot of things did, but this especially. It wasn't just that a super pretty girl kept looking at her, well, that was a little bit of it. It felt like her stare was searching for something, itching to take her apart and find whatever she was looking for. And considering Izumi had All Might's quirk, someone searching for secrets was very anxiety-inducing. Hoping that it wasn't anything serious, Izumi willed her voice not to shake. You wanted to talk about something, Todoroki? The other girl fixed her with a stare, crossing her arms as she leant against the wall. Izumi flinched, bracing herself for some bombshell like, I figured out your quirk, or you're involved in a top-secret conspiracy, or I'm actually an alien who can read minds and that alien thing back there insulted me so much that I'm going to eat you, only to be met with something entirely different but no less troublesome. Are you All Might's secret love child or something? What? Even if the girl had denied the blood relation to All Might, her wording implied there was something there. Shouko narrowed her eyes, taking in the tiny girl before her. Well, no, tiny wasn't right. She'd been thinking of the other girl as small, but defined muscle and curvature spoke to a pint-sized powerhouse. So why is Izumi Midoriya such a nervous crybaby? For a moment, Shuko's mind flicks to the worst-case scenario. Is it possible that the current number 1 pro is just as sinister as the current number 2? But is quickly dismissed if only because Shouko doesn't think she could trust in the system she's aiming to join for even a second if All Might turned out like Endeavor. No, Best to find more evidence before breaking your own heart. What's one way to find out someone's history? Tell them your story first. So Shouko tells. She tells of a man obsessed with power, a wife sold like a dog, a pair of twins pulled apart 2 different times, a quirkless brother becoming a phantom, and she twitches they're very strange, of a little girl blessed and cursed, of bruises and stitches and a boiling tea kettle. Midoriya looks horrified, hands going to cover her mouth as the story goes on. Shouko vaguely wonders if she should feel ashamed to admit this. She never really has, but she also knows she has a habit of spilling everything after accidentally letting a drop out, and this has rarely made her feel awkward before. Maybe she's not supposed to feel embarrassed, or maybe she is and she's simply horrendously emotionally stunted. Either way, she feels fine, and something about Midoriya makes her want to keep talking, so Shouko continues into possibly the riskiest prospect. After I started my period, I got into a fight with Endeavor. It culminated in him telling me that if I wanted to be treated like a woman so badly, that could be arranged. The next day, I found papers announcing that an omii had been arranged for me with an older man who has a temperature resistance quirk. Midoriya gasps, eyes looking suspiciously damp. Todoroki, why you need to tell a teacher? That's against the law. So are quirk marriages discriminating against the quirkless and beating your children? But look at how well those laws have functioned when someone has money and power. Shouko narrows her eyes. The only way to ensure my father to call off the arrangement is to prove I can be a suitable successor rather than an incubator for one. You made me use my fire, but it won't happen again. I'll win with my ice to prove I'm strong enough without him, but that it would also be a waste to marry me off in my prime. But that's dash. I've said all I need to say. Shouko speaks coolly as she interrupts Midoriya's stuttered plea, pushing off the wall she was leaning back against and turning to leave. It's only right to let you know why I'm declaring war against you. Like it or not, I know you're connected to All Might. Many people are aware of that, and I have a duty to fulfill. I'll beat you to prove myself. Shouko has stepped out of the hall and into the sunlight, strolling towards the cafeteria when Midoriya abruptly calls out. Wait. Pausing, Shouko turns her head slightly to see Midoriya standing there, fists clenched. Todoroki, we've had such different lives. To be honest, I still feel like I'm not worthy of being here. But so many people have supported me and given me this chance. I can't let them down. Shouko Todoroki, I'm going to show you my best no matter what. I'm going to win. There it is again on that girl, a fire that doesn't burn her up, a stark determination even as her fists shake. Shouko thinks of that quote again, resolves to try and find the source. We'll see. Don't you dare lose until I get the chance to fight you. With that, the conversation is over, and Shouko walks off in the direction of the cafeteria. For whatever reason, Midoriya heads the other way. Whatever. If she wants to be late to eat, that's on her. Todoroki. There's a call for her as soon as she opens the cafeteria door, sounding both relieved and panicky. It's Yaoyorozu, rushing forwards with an orange bundle in her arms. Thank goodness you're here. There's been a schedule change from Aizawa. We need to get changed into these for the recreational activities. Where's Midoriya? Last time I saw her, she was wandering back into the stadium. Shouko says as a bunch of orange and green is shoved into her hands. What? She'll miss lunch. Ugh, we really need to get the whole class to exchange numbers. Thank you, Todoroki. And with that, Yaoyorozu is off, seemingly hunting for the green-haired girl. Shouko takes a minute to examine what's been handed to her, eyebrows shooting up. Seriously? Why was this mandated? Whatever, she'd really rather not get in trouble for something as stupid as this, so Shouko vows to head off to the change room as soon as she's done eating. Though eating doesn't prevent her from Googling a certain quote, a strange and burning confusion that arises whenever her eyes fall on Midoriya's head during class reviving as she rereads it and finds the context. Looking back at it, Aizawa wouldn't make a weird, creepy change like mandatory cheerleader costumes. But hindsight is always 20/20 and does very little to help you and your 8 other gobsmacked classmates as you all realize you've been tricked on national TV. Shouko feels far too exposed in the costume, pom-poms shifting to cover her stomach awkwardly as she feels a rush of eyes on her for an unwanted reason. Kaminari! My Netta! Was this you? Jairu snaps at the two, offering thumbs-ups. Shuko hears Yaoyorozu make a miserable noise as she crouches into a ball. It's not funny. It's just a prank, Jair. Sorry, we couldn't resist joking around with you guys a little. Kaminari, for his part, seems more playful and sheepish than the leering Mineta. It's not a joke unless everyone's laughing. Uraraka speaks surprisingly sternly. Do we look like we're having fun? The playfulness is decreasing, leaving the electric boy seemingly unsure of himself. Shuko's got a bit of a theory about Kaminari just judging by his general behavior, but now's not really the time to give him some sympathy, like she's good at that even when they certainly do deserve it. Mineta, on the other hand, waves them off with a smug smile. Shuko decides that she hates him a little. Oh ladies, don't you know it'll raise the replays of the festival? It's all for a good cause in the end. So I guess it'd be okay to fool you guys out in skimpy cheer costumes too, right? Ashido snaps, tone mocking as she continues. Plenty of people like that. It's for a good cause. Ugh, I thought these were cute uniforms, and knowing you're the reason they're here ruins them. Hagakure seems to be trying to make the best of the situation, waving her pom-poms around, and it sounds like she's smiling, even if the pep in her voice is a bit forced. It's okay, guys. Let's find the silver lining. What if we go cheer on some of the general studies kids while they do their recreational events? It'll improve our class's reputation. Shuko is tired of both this conversation and the way that multiple boys from the sports field aren't even trying to hide their gazes. It's somehow less irritating than the random girls from the field who are glaring at the 8 of them who pissed in their cereal. She sighs, rolling her eyes. I'm going to get changed. And not a huge loss. Mineta shrugs. Todoroki's got a nice face even with the scar, but she's a total washing board otherwise. Don't talk about her that way. Much to her shock, it's Midoriya who stands up for her, stepping out in front and scowling. We'll tell Aizawa. Get a life, grape freak? Jairu rolls her eyes, turning and walking off with a miserable-looking Yaoyorozu. She tilts her head back. Todoroki, we're getting changed. You wanna come? Nodding, Shuko follows suit. Being put in a sexy costume on national television for no reason whatsoever was just pissing her off before the 3rd event. She hears Kaminari try and stutter off something like an apology, but that's cut off by Azui telling him that you'll probably make it worse if you speak to them now, ribbit, and boy is she right. Shuko stalks off, unsure if the fact that perverts found her body to be unappealing was good or bad. She thinks of Hideyomi. She thinks that it's good. Some of the girls had followed Hagakure's lead by staying behind and cheering for the other classes, which seemed to fluster them more than encourage them. Midoriya and Azui had almost seemed like they wanted to go back, but the triple threat of Hagakure, Ashido and Uraraka lead to those two electing to stay and cheer. Shuko tuned it all out, newly changed into her gym uniform and standing with Jairu and Yaoyorozu against one of the walls. Was I too harsh on Kaminari? Jairu sighs, toying idly with one of her earphone jacks. I was pretty pissed off, but... Yaoyorozu put a hand on her shoulder, smiling gently. I don't think you were in the wrong at all. I know you're better acquainted with him than the rest of us are, so maybe he'll realize he was out of line because the first protest came from you. Hopefully. It's not like I dislike him or anything, he's at least got a nice personality outside of all that nonsense, unlike the grape. I hope he's not mad or anything. Jairu rubbed the toe of her shoe into the grass. Thanks, Yamamo. Shuko blinked. Who's Yamamo? That's, Jairu turned beet red, tensing up. Oh, it was just a little nickname I thought up for Yaoyorozu. Her eyes flickered nervously to the dark-haired girl. If you don't like it, dash? Not at all. I love it. Yaoyorozu clapped her hands together, eyes sparkling. She must have been a bit of a sheltered rich girl too. Yamamo. It's terribly cute. Thank you. Jairu looked relieved beyond belief, exhaling deeply. Phew. Thought I'd overstepped a boundary there. You can call me Kyoka. Both of you. Right. Shuko still had to partake in this conversation. Please call me Shuko then. Yamamo, Kyoka, and Shuko. Yaoyorozu, should Shuko start mentally referring to her as Momo? Maybe, looked pleased as punch by this development. I'll remember that. Kyoka smiled and opened her mouth to say something else just as Midnight called everyone back to the field. Exchanging smiles in Kyoka and Momo's case, or nods in Shuko's case, the three girls made their way to where the 18-plus only hero was currently hyping up the crowd before placements were announced. However, before she could pull up the results, there was a hand raised at the front. Ojiro was dropping out, it seemed. Something about not getting here on his own merits. Wasn't he on Team Shinso? Shuko didn't even know who that was. A Class 1B kid or something. While she looks for this mysterious cryptid in the ground, a Class 1B she's never spoken to before drops out as well. Whatever. If they want to waste their chances, that's fine by her. Some other Class 1B kids are brought up, and as the results finally come on screen, it looks like Shuko isn't paired against either of them, so she's unbothered. Reading lazily, she examines the names for the first round. Round 1. Inasa Yorashi vs Hitoshi Shinso. Mina Ishido vs Hantashiro. Shouko Todoroki vs Mei Hatsum. Izumi Midoriya vs Yuga Oyama. Katsuki Bakugu vs Denki Kaminari. Ochako Uraraka vs Ibara Shiozaki. Idro Kirishima vs Momo Yaoyorozu. Fumikage Tokoyami vs Tenya Ida. Mei Hatsum is an unknown, most likely 1B or possibly either the support or general studies students who made it through. Regardless, Shuko is confident in being able to defeat her. There's something she's far more interested in right now, and it's that provided Midoriya defeats Aoyama, and she has no doubt in her mind that she will, they'll be able to face off. Her own strength, her value, it can be proven should she take down the girl who bested her so cleverly in the first round. Shuko's eyes fixate on the back of Midoriya's neck, the other student still in that cheerleader costume, and her gaze narrows. All Might Special One, little Hermia? She has to go down and go down hard. Natsuo Hikawa is concerned. They're all crowded in Ryo's room, and it's slightly too humid. Natsuo knows the girl needs it because of how her lower body is entirely tentacles, but seriously, could they have held the viewing party in someone else's room? He feels Lonnie rest her head on his shoulder as the commercial break starts, some of his tension draining out as his girlfriend's kinky hair tickles his chin. Junya and Hiroyuki are chatting excitedly by the TV, beers in hand. It turns out the two other boys he'd met at the Quirkless support group on campus always searched for an excuse to day drink. Sosuke is rambling excitedly to Ryo about the purple-haired kid that made it onto the third round. It's his little cousin and they actually have the exact same quirk. How exciting is that? Natsuo wonders if his human anatomy classmate is worried for his relative too, though he suspects it's not in the same way he worries for Shuko right now. Speaking of worrying for Shuko, Natsuo's phone lights up with a text. Pulling it out of his pocket, he opens the messaging app. Fumi, did you see the second round too? Natsuo, 5. Fumi, do you think that'll be better or worse for her? With dad and all. Natsuo, depends on whether or not she uses it in the fighting portion. Fumi, do you know much about her competitor? Sorry, I'm watching with my class and have to keep looking away to keep them in line. Natsuo, room full of third graders versus room full of tipsy college kids. Annoyance battle start. Natsuo, but if though, I'm pretty sure she's the pink-haired support kid? Fumi, so we don't know her quirk or if it's dire enough for Shuko to use her fire. Her next competitor may be that green-haired girl who swiped at her though. That may affect things. Natsuo, I don't even know if it's good or bad for her to use it. Ugh. Every part of it is worrying. Fumi, welcome to being a big sibling, tongue sticking out. Fumi, in any case, I may have to freeze those two boys who pulled that stunt with the cheerleading costumes. Natsuo, I don't have a quirk, but what I do have? Come get some weirdos. Natsuo, protective big sibling mode activate. Fumi, we'll fight them together. Fumi, anyways, I need to get back to the kids. Let's just hope it turns out okay. Natsuo sighed, dropping the phone to his lap and rubbing his forehead. Lonnie shifted, tilting her head up to look her boyfriend in the eyes. Her hair was still red and white, the girl having promised to keep it on like a good luck charm for the youngest Todoroki. You okay? Good. Just a little stressed over Shuko. Natsuo replied, Lonnie nodding sympathetically. While he hadn't told her much about his sister's situation, she knew enough about his to extrapolate that Shouko probably went through a similarly awful situation. She's one tough cookie. I'm sure it'll turn out all right in the end. After getting a smile and quick kiss out of her boyfriend, Lonnie sat back up straight, pointing towards the TV. Everyone. It's starting again. And so Natsuo shifted to a more comfortable position, anxiously glued to the screen as the first pair took to the stage, Sosuke roaring with glee that it's his cousin. That's Hitoshi. Don't we look alike? Only to get promptly roasted by everyone who reminded the excitable student that his head was literally just a cat head, albeit a purple one. He couldn't look more different from the tired boy on screen. Natsuo couldn't help but wonder if, when Shouko became a woman rather than a girl, she'd look like Fumi. He hoped so. He knew the pain of sharing their father's shape. The two competitors approached the ring, one a tired-looking boy named Hitoshi Shinso, supposedly from general studies. The other, a way too enthusiastic giant from 1B named Inasa Yorashi. Oh, weren't they both on the train this morning? She remembered having that stare down with the Shinso boy. Shuko's line of thought is interrupted as Momo gasps in surprise from her side. Oh, Yorashi. He was one of the other recommended students. I heard he came first overall. At her proclamation, Shouko bristles. So there was already someone stronger than her here? She hadn't even considered the two other recommended students that resided in 1B. Before she can think about that, though, a grating laugh rattles her eardrums like the world's shittiest maracas. Oh ho ho! So the high and mighty class 1A didn't even think that there'd be a real powerhouse in the other class. A blond boy pops his head over the barrier between both classes' seating sections, looking slightly deranged. Who the hell was this asshole? The strongest recommended student is ours, not yours. What a shame for poor little Yaoyorozu and Todoroki. We're both rich and taller than average. We're neither of those things. Also, I don't know you. Shouko deadpants because it's true. Before the blonde can respond, there's a giant hand chopping at his neck from behind, and he slides out of view with a keening noise. A much friendlier face pops over the barrier, looking apologetic. Sorry about him. We try to keep Monoma in control, but he gets away from us sometimes. That is quite all right, Miss Kendo. Ida is on his feet, arms chopping around wildly enough that Tokoyami has to duck to avoid getting smacked in the beak. From one class representative to another, I declare that all is well again thanks to your mediating. Kendo chuckles a little, though she's distracted by something to her side that's out of view for Class 1A, tilting her head down to the obscured individual. Kendo looks pensive. HM? What's up, Shouda? I wasn't able to find Yorashi before the match. The voice sounds frantic, and Shouko recognizes it thanks to the earlier dropout. That's Nairenjiki Shouda, the boy from Team Shinso who had stepped down. I needed to warn him about that creepy guy's quirk. Kirishima's loud and enthusiastic voice prevents Shouko from being able to hear the rest of Class 1B's conversation. Oh, it's starting. It's starting. All gazes focus towards where Midnight is swinging her flog, announcing the official start. Winds start to pick up around Yorashi, the boy's fiery enthusiasm almost palpable in the air as dust devils begin forming. Midnight holds down her hair to keep it in place. Shinso looks up, says something far too distant to be audible, and Yorashi freezes up, his quirk deactivating. Shinso points past Yorashi, saying something else, and the entire arena watches in shocked silence as the Hero Corps student turns and begins to walk away from his competitor, a sad keening noise in the Shouda boy's voice echoing out as Yorashi walks out of bounds. A flabbergasted-looking Midnight calls the match in Shinsu's favor, and things erupt. The audience is beyond confused, but roaring with cheers for whatever the hell just happened anyways. Class 1A is chattering excitedly, wondering what exactly just occurred down there as Yorashi seems to snap back to reality, looking around in shock. Class 1B, meanwhile, is total chaos. There's shouting, frantic unanswered questions, and a boy's voice yelling at someone named Komori to let her know that hey, you're growing mushrooms on me. Yeah, they're taking it a lot harder, and Shouko doesn't blame them, it's their classmate, after all. And who the hell was this general fucking studies kid who just took out the highest ranked recommended student in a matter of seconds? Ojiro groans behind her, face buried in his hands. Of course, that guy's Quirk. Wait, you know his Quirk? Midoriya manages to look up from where her nose is buried in her Quirk analysis notebook. Ojiro nods grimly, pursing his lips. When you respond to whatever he's saying, he can take control of you. That's how he got us to join. A mind control quirk? Isn't it more suited to a villain? Well, Shuko's not here to question motivations. Hers aren't exactly the purest either. The battle between Ishido and Shiro is favored towards the pink girl, but the other student puts up a valiant fight regardless. He's producing tape just slightly slower than she can melt it, and Ishido eventually wins out, escaping his grasp and managing to use raw physical strength to knock the boy down and pin him. Shiro yields as she pins his arms down and holds an acid-coated fist over his head, and the two get up together, smiling and laughing. They're clearly friends, the match ending with no hard feelings. That will be a nice, easy one for the replay channel's enemies on the battlefield, comrades right after. Shuko has learned how the festival functions and what reporters like to show off based on her obsessive viewings of it while training. Midoriya and Aoyama is, well, Shuko only gets to see about half of it, considering she's in the anteroom in preparation for her own match. Midoriya mostly just dodged the entire time, trying to get in close enough for a strike, and that's when Shuko had to leave the stands to go get ready. Judging by the shuddering wind pressure that shakes her prep room table slightly, however, she'd used her quirk. Even without seeing the match, Shuko knows Midoriya has won. She's ushered out into the hallway, and she feels a sense of adrenaline run through her body as she steps into the sunlight to the roar of an adoring crowd. She's introduced as the youngest daughter of our own flame hero Endeavor. It's the burning cold Shouko Todoroki of Class 1A, and Shuko's jaw clenches. That's all she is to these people, isn't it? Just an extension of him. The other girl, Hatsum, is eager to go, hopping around from foot to foot and waving at the crowd. Is she aiming for some PR stunt? It would make sense with the way she was showboating with her inventions during the cavalry battle. Shuko gets into a fighting stance, allowing a moment of tranquility to overcome her, ice rushing through her veins and cooling any remaining nerves. As soon as Midnight swings her whip, Shuko releases the pent-up power of her cryokinesis in a wave of ice. For her part, Hatsum does decently. Most of her items are useful in dodging Shuko's initial barrages, darting out of the way of ice. Of course, the bicolored girl is agile enough to dodge things like fired nets or flashbangs, but she's silently impressed that Hatsum created all of this. Anyone who hadn't been raised to fight would likely have been caught. She's clearly in it to promote her support items, and Shuko allows her to finish her final sentence describing the capabilities of her jetpack before finally ending it via a burst of ice that encases the other girl up to her shoulders. Midnight calls the match, and Hatsum is grinning even while she shivers under the icy barrage as Shuko approaches to melt her out. Oh, good moves, freezer burn. I could tell you were holding back a little to let me present my beautiful babies, so I owe you one. Don't worry about it. Shuko isn't sure someone with the slightly unhinged air that Hatsum carries is someone she wants a favor from. Also, what's with the nicknames from people today? A word of advice for you as a support student from someone who grew up around it. Hatsum cocks her head, seeming interested. Stay away from Climate Support Company. Even if they're prestigious, their higher management are not to be trusted around girls our age. That's probably not true for all the executives, but frankly, they have a pervert who likely only got his position via nepotism on staff. Shuko doesn't feel bad preventing them from snatching up such a bright young talent. Hatsum nods, grinning. Oh, industry secrets from an insider? I owe you double the favors now. I'll keep it in mind, freezer burn. Now could you hurry up the melting a little? Some of my babies aren't exactly weatherproofed yet. Shuko rolls her eyes, allowing more heat to seep through her skin. After the match, Shuko had been given a quick check for any injuries by one of Recovery Girl's assistant nurses and then sent on her way. She's just in time to catch the end of Bakugo vs. Kaminari, by which she means she's there for 20 out of the 30 seconds it took to conclude. She'd had a degree of hope for the electric boy, seeing the way he could competently take orders when he was on her team earlier, but it seems like he'd quickly blown his power in one shot. Bakugo propelling himself off the electrified earth with explosions and quickly landing one directly against Kaminari's defenseless face. The drooling boy had been knocked out cold instantly, ending it rather anticlimactically. Hopefully he was too out of it to understand the way the audience was shouting that it was a nice try in a sad attempt at comfort. Now, Uraraka versus Shiozaki was much more of a wild card. Shuko knew Uraraka's quirk, and it seemed like Shiozaki could control those vines that made up her hair. She had a rough idea of what might happen as the two girls lined up on stage, but Midoriya's muttering a couple rows down confirmed what she herself was thinking. So Shiozaki's quirk is good for distance and capture primarily, and Uraraka can only do close-range combat. That said, if Shiozaki's vines count as part of her body, it's basically Uraraka's match. But even if she floats her, that leaves dash. Damn it, Deku. I can hear you from all the way over here. Bakugo shouts in anger, corralled back in by Kirishima, who wrangles him into his chair. Shut up already. For some reason, watching Midoriya's whole body clench in fear before she hid her face in her notebook, two of her fingers were bandaged, her quirk from round one, presumably. It was really irking Shuko more than it needed to after she saw the other girl's determined face and strong voice back in the hallway earlier. Why did this one boy manage to make her shrink into herself? Turning her head towards Bakugo, a few seats away, Shuko glares before she can think. It's strange to hear you telling someone to shut up. There's a chorus of uhu throughout the class, mostly from Siro and Ishido, honestly, and Bakugo suddenly looks like he's about to blow a fuse. The fuck did you say to me, icy hot? Guys, geez. Hagakure waves her arms, probably. The match is starting. For now, all debate ceases as the class turns to watch Uraraka battle it out with the 1B girl. Determination on her face visible even from here, the girl rushes forwards. Shiozaki clasps her hands, vines shooting out. One goes for Uraraka's ankle, but the zero-gravity user had tapped both her running shoes just before rushing her opponent, jumping with degravified shoes and avoiding the first attack. Is she going in for the body? Ishido questions, a finger pressed against her chin. If she can avoid her vines, that seems like it'll work, but Shiozaki is pretty fast. No, that's not it at all. Midoriya murmurs, leaning forwards as Uraraka released her zero-gravity on her shoes. It seems like Shiozaki has better control of those shorter vines around her forehead in close range. That would be bad for Uraraka. But look at what she's doing with her shirt. As she bolted, Uraraka was unzipping her UA sports jacket at the same time. A strip show from a babe, shouted Mineta before Azui smacked him with her tongue. Thank God. Uraraka wears a tank top under her sports jacket, ribbit. Don't be gross. It was true. Uraraka yanked off the jacket, revealing a tank top underneath. Maybe 5 yards from Shiozaki, the girl let out a battle cry and tossed the jacket. It was an easily predictable move, Shiozaki catching it with a vine and tossing it out of bounds. However, it looked like Uraraka had another plan. Midoriya was out of her seat, having rushed to the front of the box seats to lean against the railing in awe. I see she's doing it. She's going through with the plan she told me? What plan? Asked Shuji from behind the excitable green-haired girl. Midoriya turned with a blinding smile of excitement, and Shuko found herself shifting about in her seat. The jacket ruse. It was true, throwing the jacket had been a mild distraction for Shiozaki. She'd easily be able to stop Uraraka from getting in close like that. But instead of continuing to run, Uraraka threw herself to the right, leaping on a vine that was resting idly on the ground while its owner focused on the thrown clothing. Shooting out her arms, Uraraka smacked the vine, and Shiozaki yelped as she found herself freed from the pull of gravity. So they did work as an extension of her body. The girl tried to get a grasp on Uraraka, but the brunette was already throwing her back, vine in her hands used like a rope to hurl her opponent towards the white line. Uraraka grimaced as she avoided a vine by floating herself backwards, ending up near the very spot where she'd started just as a helpless Shiozaki flew out of bounds. Shiozaki is out of bounds. Midnight called, swinging her whip as Uraraka released both herself and the Class 1B student, looking even greener than her opponent's hair. Uraraka wins. Whoops and cheers erupt from 1A as Uraraka offers a thumbs up and shaky smile to the crowd, even as she looks like her lunch might resurface. Shuko offered a couple claps up. Uraraka had been nothing but pleasant to her, so it felt somewhat necessary. Midoriya, predictably, was tearing up as she cheered for her friend alongside Ida. Shuko's eyes lingered on the back of the girl's head. They'd be fighting next round, wouldn't they? She had 2 fingers wrapped in bandages, most likely from when she'd apparently panicked and blown Aoyama clean out of the ring. So she was already at a disadvantage. All Might's golden girl. Shuko narrowed her eyes as Midoriya stiffened for some reason. Kirishima and Momo were up next, weren't they? Should she stay for her friend? Acquaintance? It's true she and Shuko were on a first-name basis now, but the bicolored girl had no real way to classify Momo, and Kyoka Beyond also had no time for cheerleading comrades. In any case, Shuko figured she should at least stay and watch. Sitting back, she turned her eyes to Momo as the whistle was blown. Yaoyorozu, against all odds, had lost. It didn't make sense, Izumi thought. She was objectively more powerful than Kirishima, even if she wasn't as physically strong. The girl was a genius, too. Why didn't she just make a net to catch him and then push him out of bounds? Or startle him with a flashbang and use the advantage to get him out of the ring? She just frozen up, Kirishima easily pushing past her shield and forcing her past the white line. It was a little disappointing. Yaoyorozu had so much potential for an amazing fight, and she'd gone down so easily. Deku? Deku? Hey H-ha. Izumi is only snapped from her thoughts as she receives a gentle poke to her freckled cheek. Startling a bit, she turns to see Uraraka regarding her curiously. Kirishima and Yaoyorozu's match had torn up a lot of the arena floor via Kirishima's hardening, so there was a small break while Cementos rebuilt it, giving the students time to chat among themselves. So with Ida in the anteroom in anticipation for his match, that left the 2 girls of their friendship group to talk. You were totally zoned out there, Uraraka exclaims, cocking her head. Hey, if you're nervous for your next match? And no, it's not that. Izumi waves her hands around with a stilted chuckle. I mean, I am nervous, it's Todoroki and she did challenge me, and obviously her quirk is super difficult to counterdash. She's cut off by another cheek poke, making an embarrassing noise as Uraraka giggles. You're like one of those rubber charms, squeaking when I poke you. But seriously, you were doing the rambling again. Izumi's cheeks flush, and she meeps in nervousness. Was I? Sir? I guess I just learned something earlier that upset me. Uraraka purses her lips. Oh Deku, are you okay? I'm fine, please don't worry. The last thing Izumi wants is to distract her friend from her next match by making her too concerned. It's just what? Uraraka, can I ask you something? Always. Uraraka shifts towards her a little, like they're 2 friends sharing gossip. The thought is almost upsetting to Izumi. She hopes Todoroki doesn't think that's what she's doing all those rows behind her in the stands, and yes, she knows the other girl is staring. She's familiar with the feeling of her eyes specifically on the back of her neck. Trying to figure out how to phrase this, Izumi gives it her best shot and lowers her volume. If you learned someone respected and powerful was committing a super serious crime from one of the victims, but both of you know all the people he's hurting don't have enough influence to even scratch him. If telling the truth could seriously disrupt public safety, what would you do? For a moment, Uraraka looked shocked, but it quickly morphed into a mix of sympathy and concern. That sounds like a pretty big problem. How bad are they being hurt? Izumi thinks of a girl with an empty gaze, thinks of deep red scarring over aquamarine, thinks of the way her own heart clenched when she heard how casually Shuko had told her about an impending marriage she was being strong-armed into. Thinking of her in a wedding dress with a veil that didn't disguise the dead-eyed stare she'd had when she mentioned her future. It makes Izumi's stomach flip. Pretty bad. Really bad, actually. Then you need to tell someone at least? Uraraka decides after a moment of thinking. Even if they can't stop the bad person, maybe they can help the victims a little? It's the heroic thing to do. There's another pause before she sputters, waving her arms around in an Ida-like fashion and almost clocking Ojiro in front of them. I mean that's just my opinion. It's silly of someone like me to preach heroism to someone like you, But don't put yourself down. Izumi quickly reddens, her own arms fluttering about in a matching fashion. They actually did hit Ojiro this time, who let out an exhausted sigh and changed seats, knowing better than to get between those two and a flustered conversation. I think you're really heroic, Uraraka. Thank you for the help, I just didn't know what to do. Thank you, Deku. I don't really know if it's the right answer. Or if there is one. She sighs, shrugging. But in any case, I'd try and get some super good evidence against the person doing the bad stuff. If they're that strong, you'd need a good case for them to get punished. That was true. If someone like Endeavor was going to be prosecuted, and Izumi hated even thinking of his name now, she'd never admired him quite like All Might, but she had always thought of him as brave and cool, she would need plenty of evidence. Even so, the effect that might have on Hero Society plus Todoroki's reaction? Izumi slouched into her seat, sighing. That's probably true. It's just a difficult situation. I'm sure you'll pick the right option. Uraraka beamed, offering a supportive pat on the shoulder. You're you after all? I'm not all that smart. Izumi's cheeks reddened, hands flying up to cover her face. I'm just gonna hide in here until the next match starts. You better come out soon then. They're walking out. Uraraka points as Izumi lowered her hands to see Ida and Tokoyami march onto the field to the sound of cheering. Her brunette friend joined in, cupping her hands around her mouth and shouting, "Gugu Ida." Embarrassment forgotten as the desire to support her friend riled her up, Izumi grinned and yelled alongside Uraraka. "You can do it, Ida." Leaning forwards, she subconsciously popped out her notebook, pen tapping against the page as she waited for midnight to start the match. Even so, her mind was heavy with thoughts. Todoroki needed help that Izumi couldn't give her, even though realizing that tore her up. Who could help? Could anyone help? She couldn't possibly bring this up to All Might's the number one hero accusing the number two of being a serial abuser? Hero Society would be in shambles, and they couldn't afford that after all the recent news with the hero killer. Maybe there was one other person who could help her, though. After Yaoyorozu's loss, Shuko had gone for a walk. She wasn't that interested in how Tokoyami versus Ida would play out, so she decided to leave at that point. Walking down the hallways, she briefly contemplated getting another one of those delicious nashi pear tarts from concessions until she remembered that she had a match to win and didn't have any money on her anyways. Besides, sticking around in this area seemed like it wouldn't settle the discomfort in her stomach. This weird guy with black hair and scarred-up eyes kept staring at her from the corner. She was willing to bet he had even more under that flu mask. Glaring at him, she made her way to the restricted hallways. To access them, you'd either need to be a student, Shuko, or a pro. Shuko turned to scowl at Endeavor, his arms crossed as he stared down his youngest child. "What do you want?" "You're acting disgracefully." The man spat out, taking a step towards her. "You would have taken first unquestionably in every event if you'd quit this childish rebellion and used your full power. Do you have any idea what the consequences for failure will be for you?" "I know damn well what they are." Shuko's hands subconsciously moved to the thigh Ando had been feeling up last week. "And I'm still going to win. I'll just do it without you." "You're weak without me," he responded curtly. "That Bakugo boy will make a fool out of you if all you do is use your ice." Shuko's lip curled in a sneer. "I wasn't aware your real Quirk was telling the future. There's no guarantee he'll make it to the finals with me. Do not get an attitude with me, Shouko." Endeavor took another step forwards, and Shuko heard something over the intercoms about Tokoyami emerging victorious, but she was more focused on the way her muscles tensed, ready to fight or flee if she had to. He wouldn't hit her here, would he? No, it was unlikely. Her father was a horrible person, but Shuko could begrudgingly admit he was smart. That said, she had learned over time not to underestimate her father's anger, and she needed to be careful. "Even if it's him I fight, I'll overwhelm him with no trouble. I've been training by myself, I'm still determined to win. I won't be a brood bitch you can sell off to suit your imperious pipe dreams." That was a bit too far, and Shuko prepared to raise her arms in defense as her father's eyes flashed. "Shouko Todoroki, how dare dash. T. Todoroki!" A pitched voice called out, and father and daughter both turned to see a trembling Izumi Midoriya on the other side of the hallway. Mr. Aizawa sent me? To get you. He, needs to talk to everyone going on to the second round. So, here I am. There was a crushingly awkward moment of silence, Midoriya standing there like an anxious, trembling statue as Shouko and Endeavor just stared. Eventually, Shouko sighed, flipping her hair over her shoulder as she marched towards the anxious girl. You heard her. Mr. Aizawa needs us. This isn't over, Shouko. Her father warns before turning his gaze to Midoriya. Don't you dare shame this brat by holding back. You hear me? Did not call her that. Small and quiet, Midoriya's voice still somehow radiated enough determination to fight the overwhelming heat of the hallway. And there she is again, little Hermia. Endeavor raises a fiery brow. Care to repeat that? The foolish girl raises her gaze to meet the flame heroes, and her childish features harden as her voice raises. I said dash. Midoriya, we're going. Come on. Shouko was hit by a wave of panic as she realized the foolish choice Midoriya was about to make, grabbing the girl by the arm and dragging her around the corner despite the green-haired girl's hiss of pain. Once she'd all but yanked her a suitable distance away, Shouko turned to grab her by the shoulder, expression incredulous. What the hell were you thinking? Midoriya's expression is guilt-ridden, but she doesn't lose the determination in her tone. He was being mean to you. I wanted him to stop. Shouko rolled her eyes, releasing Midoriya and pinching the bridge of her own nose in irritation. Whatever. What did Aizawa want? Oh, he actually didn't want anything. The smaller girl looked sheepish as she rubbed the back of her neck. I just came looking for you because I was worried when Endeavor wasn't in the heroes section. I'm putting the brakes on this before it starts. Shouko scowled at Midoriya, who seemed to shrink into herself. Maybe I should have known this before I told you why I have to beat you, but I'm not looking for some hero to whisk me away from him. I've handled him my whole life, and I still can. Don't stick your nose where you don't belong. But he's hurting you. Midoriya exclaimed, shrinking further as Shouko's angry stare grew deeper. You said all that stuff before about the omii and I want to help you before it gets really bad, or the man you're supposed to get married to decides to. If he ever tries. Shouko realizes what she's getting at. Until he what? Rapes me? Watching Midoriya blanch at the word, Shouko scoffs, crossing her arms. Tell me, how do you think my siblings and I were conceived? Do you think my mother was truly willing to lie down with my father? Of course not. I have full reason to believe that my father is a marital rapist, and I have no doubt Ando will be as well. But until we're married, he's too smart to try and pull something so drastic. That would violate the terms. And believe me, I will not allow myself to be married off. I'll win this tournament. How can you talk about it so casually? Midoriya is clenching her fists, looking up in bewilderment and sadness. Todoroki, this isn't how normal people live. I'm not a normal person. The world I'm made for and the one you live in are very different. Shouko glares one last time before turning on her heels, leaving the stuttering girl alone. Don't interfere in my life. There's nothing that can be done to help me, so stop it before you make it worse than you already have. Go back to playing friends with Ida and Uraraka, and be thankful for what you have. Todoroki. There's a keening tone in Midoriya's fading voice as Shouko walks away, and she ignores the way it stirs something in her chest. This didn't clear her mind at all, and judging by the loudspeakers in the hallway, the fight between Ishido and Shinso was about to begin. Both of them would need to head to their respective anterooms. She ices her heart over one last time, letting emptiness overtake her like an old friend. She can't afford to go into this match angry. Izumi bit at her lip as she tries to hold back tears. She wishes she wasn't such a crybaby, but the conversation with Todoroki? Well, it was nothing short of horrifying seeing how casually the girl treated her abusive life. Izumi swore she'd never forgive Endeavor for raising a child to believe she didn't belong in a world of happiness, leaving the empty-eyed and delusional Shouko Todoroki instead of the fully alive girl she could have been in another life. And speaking of the flame hero, what on earth was she thinking talking back to him like that? Izumi wanted to punch herself 1,000,000 times for something so stupid, but her fingers were still a little bit busted. So maybe that wasn't the smartest. Mixed with the anger and regret was some guilt over what she had just done without Todoroki's knowledge. Sighing, Izumi stared down at her jacket, unzipped a little further than she normally wore the sports uniform. Unzipping it far enough that her sports bra, All Might branded limited edition Silver Age version, her favorite one worn for luck, was slightly visible along with the small rectangle tucked just into the top. Removing the object, Izumi pursed her lips as she touched the screen. It was her cell phone, and she had just shut off the recording application. Truth be told, she had been standing behind the corner since Endeavor had told Todoroki to lose the attitude, recording everything afterwards. She felt horrible about this breach of trust. Was it really a breach if Todoroki clearly trusted her about as far as she could throw her? But Uraraka had been right. Leaving this alone would be unheroic, and going in without evidence would only make things worse for the bicolored girl. Izumi wasn't sure this would be admissible in court, being recorded without consent and all that. But it may just convince one important person who she had already seen put everything on the line for his students to help her. Opening her notes, Izumi made a reminder to herself. Show recording to Mr. Aizawa after festival.